Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There exists, in the grim darkness of the far future, a transformation so profound, so utterly complete, that it strips away almost everything that makes you human and rebuilds you into something that transcends the boundaries of flesh and mortality. To become a Primaris space marine is to walk a path that begins with the death of who you were and ends with the birth of something that humanity created but can no longer fully comprehend. It is to exist in a state between human and something far beyond, to carry the weight of genetic modification that has rewritten every cell in your body, every synapse in your brain. When you think of space marines, you might imagine armored titans striding through battlefields without fear, their bolters roaring defiance at the enemies of mankind. And yes, that image holds truth. But beneath that ceramite armor, behind the skull-faced helm, there exists an experience that few can understand. The reality of being a Primaris marine is not simply about being taller, stronger, or more resilient than your firstborn brothers. It is about existing in a body that has been engineered to specifications that push the very limits of what organic life can become. It is about having your humanity carved away piece by piece, replaced by organs that no natural evolution would ever produce, filled with capabilities that come at a price that cannot be measured in thrones or territory. The story of the Primaris Marines begins not in the fire of recent battles, but 10,000 years ago in the laboratories beneath the red sands of Mars. When Reboot Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines, gave his command to Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call in the aftermath of the Horus heresy, it was a command born of desperate foresight. Guilliman saw what others refused to acknowledge, that the Imperium would face a darkness so profound that even the space marines of old might not be enough to hold back the tide. He tasked Call with the impossible, to improve upon the Emperor's own design, to create warriors who could stand against threats that had not yet emerged from the shadows of the future. For 10 millennia, Call worked in secret. While the Imperium waged its endless wars, while chapters rose and fell, while billions lived and died, never knowing that beneath Mars something was being perfected, Call labored. He took the genetic template that the Emperor had crafted for the original Space Marines, and he did what many would consider blasphemy. He improved it, using technologies salvaged from the cellular gene cults of Luna, employing the Sang Primus Portum that contained genetic material from the Primarchs themselves. He created the Primaris Marines. Warriors who would stand taller, strike harder, endure more. Warriors who possessed not 19 gene seed organs, but 22. Warriors whose very existence would reshape the Adeptus Astartes forever. And then, at humanity's darkest hour, when the Great Rift tore reality asunder and demon legions poured through the wound in space, when Abaddon the Despoiler led his 13th Black Crusade toward terror itself, they were awakened. The Primaris Marines emerged from their stasis chambers, and the galaxy would never be the same. But what does it mean to be one of these warriors? What is the reality behind the propaganda, behind the legends that spread across a million worlds? What does it feel like to exist as a weapon that thinks, a tool of war wrapped in flesh that is no longer entirely your own? To understand this, we must walk through the transformation itself, through each stage of creation that strips away mortality and replaces it with something that the Imperium calls its finest warriors. We must understand that to become a Primaris Marine is not simply to gain power. It is to sacrifice everything you were on the altar of what you must become. The journey begins not with glory, but with selection. Somewhere on a world that might be civilized or might be feral, might be peaceful or might be torn by constant war, a child catches the attention of those who seek the worthy. Perhaps they survive trials that kill dozens of others. Perhaps they show a spark of something that cannot be taught, a fire that burns hot enough to withstand what is coming. The selection process varies between chapters. Some recruit from specific worlds they have claimed as their own. Others seek warriors from populations that have proven their worth through centuries of tradition. But regardless of method, the result is the same. A child, usually between 10 and 14 years old, is chosen. They are taken from everything they have known and brought into a world that will remake them entirely. The creation process, from human to Primaris. The transformation from human child to Primaris space marine is not a single moment, but a years-long process of surgical implantation, chemical treatment, and relentless conditioning. It is a journey that begins with flesh that is recognizably human and ends with something that transcends the baseline of humanity so completely that calling it the same species feels like a dangerous simplification. Every stage of this transformation is brutal. Every organ implanted brings pain that would kill an ordinary person. Every chemical treatment rewrites biological systems in ways that fundamentally alter what it means to exist in that body. The process begins with the secondary heart, also called the maintainer. This organ is perhaps the simplest of the modifications, yet it sets the stage for everything that follows. Implanted into the chest cavity, it functions as both backup and enhancement to the original heart. Should the natural heart be destroyed or damaged, the secondary heart can maintain circulation on its own, pumping enhanced blood through veins that are about to undergo radical transformation. But more than survival, this organ allows the future marine to operate in conditions that would leave normal humans gasping. Low oxygen environments, toxic atmospheres, the thin air of high altitude, or the pressure changes of rapid descent all become survivable because the body now has redundancy built into its most vital functions. The os modula follows, a small but complex organ that secretes hormones affecting the very structure of bone. This is where the physical transformation truly begins to manifest. The skeletal system does not simply grow, it is reshaped entirely. Bones lengthen and thicken, becoming denser and stronger. The skull plates fuse and harden. But most dramatically, the ribcage transforms from separate bones into a solid mass of interlocking plates, creating a bulletproof cage around vital organs. Imagine feeling your own skeleton reshape itself, the bones in your body growing and fusing, the pain of this transformation dulled only by the body's enhanced ability to manage trauma. This process takes approximately 2 years, during which the aspirant grows to a height and bulk that marks them as different from ordinary humans. Their bones become harder than concrete, able to withstand impacts that would shatter normal skeletal structure. Next comes the biscopea, the organ responsible for the explosive muscle growth that gives space marines their legendary strength. This golf ball-sized implant nestles in the chest and releases hormones that stimulate muscle development throughout the entire body. But this is not the gradual muscle building of an athlete. This is rapid, forced growth that packs layer upon layer of enhanced muscle fiber onto the frame. The aspirant's body swells with new tissue, muscles developing in ways that allow for feats of strength that seem impossible. They can bend steel with their bare hands, crush skulls with a squeeze, rip through doors that would require industrial equipment for normal humans to breach. Every movement becomes an exercise in learning new strength, in understanding that the body now contains power that must be controlled lest it destroy everything touched. And this is where the Primaris differ from their firstborn brothers. Between the biscopea and the next standard organ, the Primaris aspirant receives 3 additional implants that represent the genius and hubris of Belisarius Caul's work. These are the Primaris alpha and beta phases, the modifications that create warriors who stand taller, strike harder, and endure more than any space marine before them. The sinew coils are the first of these Primaris-specific organs, and they represent a marriage of flesh and technology that even the Mechanicus rarely achieves. These are not purely biological enhancements. They are durametallic coil cables woven directly into the muscle tissue, reinforcing and magnifying the strength granted by the biscopea. When a Primaris marine exerts their strength, these coils contract with force that exceeds what organic tissue alone could achieve. They add another layer of interior defense as well, making the muscles themselves more resistant to damage. Imagine feeling metal thread through your flesh. becoming part of you, responding to your will as naturally as the muscles around them. This is not armor worn on the outside. This is reinforcement that exists beneath the skin, a constant reminder that you are no longer entirely biological. The Magnificat comes next, an organ that enhances all other gene seed organs simultaneously. It is a force multiplier for the entire transformation, causing the other modifications to express more strongly, to integrate more completely. The Magnificat increases muscle mass beyond even what the Biscopea and sinew coils provide. It enhances bone density further. It makes the body more resilient to damage, able to withstand punishment that would incapacitate even a firstborn Marine. Those who undergo this implantation describe a sensation of their entire body becoming more, as if every cell is suddenly operating at a higher level of efficiency. The Magnificat is what allows Primaris Marines to stand between 8 and nearly 10 feet tall in their armor, their frames massive even by the already superhuman standards of the Adeptus Astartes. The Belisarian furnace is perhaps the most remarkable of the 3 Primaris organs, and certainly the most controversial. Named for its creator, this implant serves as a biological emergency system that can pull a warrior back from the very edge of death. When trauma threatens to end the Marine's life, when wounds would overwhelm even their enhanced physiology, the Belisarian furnace activates. It releases a surge of life-sustaining chemicals directly into both hearts. A cocktail of stimulants and healing compounds that can restart a failing system, that can give a mortally wounded warrior the strength to fight on for precious additional moments. But this emergency resurrection comes at a cost. The shock to the body is tremendous, and there are accounts of warriors trying desperately to prevent their furnace from activating during rescue, knowing that the biological stress might finish what the enemy started. The furnace is also crucial for those firstborn who wish to cross the Rubicon Primaris, as the conversion procedure temporarily stops the heart, and only the furnace's intervention allows survival. Following these Primaris enhancements, the standard implantation process continues, each organ adding new capabilities that push the aspirant further from their human origins. The hemastamen transforms blood into something far more efficient, able to carry more oxygen, to clot faster, to resist toxins. The Larraman's organ creates specialized cells that form near-instant scar tissue when exposed to air, sealing wounds that would cause a normal human to bleed out in minutes. The catalepsian node, implanted into the brain, allows the Marine to remain conscious even while portions of their brain sleep, enabling them to fight effectively for weeks without true rest. The preomnor acts as a pre-stomach, neutralizing otherwise deadly poisons before they can reach the digestive system. The omophagia, one of the more disturbing organs, allows the Marine to gain genetic memory by consuming the flesh of enemies or fallen brothers, literally eating knowledge. The multi-lung enables breathing in toxic atmospheres and underwater, functioning when the normal lungs would fail. The oculobe enhances vision to superhuman levels, allowing sight in near darkness and at great distances. The Lyman's ear grants hearing far beyond normal human range and provides perfect equilibrium. The Susan membrane enables a Marine to enter a state of suspended animation, surviving injuries or conditions that would otherwise be fatal by essentially shutting down all but the most basic biological functions. The melanochrome protects against radiation and allows the skin to adapt to different light conditions. The oolitic kidney filters blood with such efficiency that virtually any toxin can be processed and expelled. The neuroglottis enhances taste and smell to the point where a Marine can track by scent alone, can taste poisons in air or water, can analyze their environment through senses that baseline humans can barely imagine. The mucranoid secretes a waxy substance across the skin that can protect against vacuum or hostile atmospheres for limited periods. The Betcher's gland produces highly acidic saliva that can dissolve metal, providing both a weapon and a tool. The progenoid glands, 2 organs that are implanted in the neck and chest, grow throughout the Marine's life, eventually containing the genetic material needed to create future Space Marines. These glands are the link in the chain, harvested from fallen or aged Marines to continue the chapter's genetic legacy. And finally, the black carapace, the implant that marks the completion of the transformation. This is not a single organ, but an engineered layer of tissue that is grafted beneath the skin in substantial sections, spreading to cover much of the body. The black carapace is what allows true interface between the Marine and their power armor. Neural ports in the carapace connect directly to the armor's systems, making the ceramite shell an extension of the Marine's own body. When a Primaris Marine dons their Mark 10 armor, they do not simply wear it, they become it. Every servo, every system, every weapon mounted on that armor responds as naturally as their own limbs. This is the final modification, and it is only after its implantation that an aspirant truly becomes a Space Marine. But the physical transformation is only part of the story. The organs are implanted in a specific sequence over the course of approximately 6 to 8 years, each one requiring time for integration, for the body to accept and adapt to these foreign additions. Between each surgical implantation comes chemical treatment, specialized compounds that help the organs develop properly, that encourage the body not to reject these intrusions. And throughout this entire process, there is training. Constant, relentless training that teaches the aspirant how to use their new capabilities, how to function in a body that becomes less familiar with each passing month. The aspirant learns to control strength that could accidentally crush objects or injure allies. They learn to process sensory input that would overwhelm a normal brain, filtering information from enhanced vision, hearing, smell, taste, touch. They learn to eat and drink substances that would poison anyone else, to function on minimal sleep, to enter controlled states of suspended animation. They learn to fight with weapons that weigh more than a baseline human, to move in armor that increases their bulk by half again. Every day brings new lessons in what this body can do, and every lesson comes with the implicit understanding of what has been lost to gain these capabilities. The Rubicon Primaris, crossing the threshold. For those who begin their lives as Primaris Marines, the transformation happens during the formative years when their bodies are still malleable, still growing. But for the firstborn, for warriors who have already served the Emperor for decades or even centuries, who carry in their bodies only the original 19 gene seed organs, there exists a different path. It is called the Rubicon Primaris, and it is perhaps the most dangerous medical procedure in the entire Imperium. To cross the Rubicon is to undergo a transformation that should be impossible, to have 3 additional organs implanted into a body that has already finished developing, that has been fighting and killing in service to the Emperor for a lifetime. The Rubicon Primaris was not possible in the early days of the Primaris rollout. Archmagos Call himself estimated the survival rate at just over 38%. Nearly 2/3 of those who attempted the procedure would die on the operating table, their bodies unable to accept the modifications, unable to survive the trauma of having their fundamental biology rewritten. For years, the Rubicon remained theoretical, a procedure that existed but that no sane commander would order and no warrior would volunteer for. The risk was simply too great, the potential loss of veteran Space Marines too catastrophic to justify. But then, Chapter Master Marnius Calgar of the Ultramarines made a decision that would echo across the entire Imperium. Calgar, legendary warrior who had led the Ultramarines for over 400 years, who had fought in more campaigns than most chapters engage in during their entire existence, who bore the honor of direct counsel with the returned Guilliman himself, volunteered to be the first. His reasoning was simple and devastating in its logic. If the chapter master would not take this risk, how could he ask any of his brothers to do so? If the Primaris were truly the future of the Adeptus Astartes, then the leadership must show faith in that future by undergoing the transformation themselves. The procedure took place in an auto-sterilized medical vault aboard one of the Ultramarines' vessels. The chamber was thick with the scent of counterseptic compounds, crowded with medical servitors and the finest apothecaries the chapter could provide. At the center stood a great marble slab, artfully carved with channels to collect the massive quantities of blood that would flow during the surgery. Calgar knew, going into that chamber, that he might never leave it. He knew that for all his strength, all his experience, all his legendary resilience, this procedure could kill him as surely as any enemy he had ever faced. The surgery was extensive beyond measure. The apothecaries had to implant 3 completely new organs into a body that had not been prepared for them during developmental years, that had not undergone the gradual process of integration and adaptation. They had to force these organs to interface with systems that had been functioning for centuries without them. The sinew coils had to be woven into muscle tissue that was already fully developed, durametallic cables threaded through flesh that had to somehow accept their presence. The Magnificat had to enhance gene seed organs that were mature and stable, forcing them to greater expression without causing rejection. The Belisarian furnace had to be connected to hearts that had been beating for 400 years, integrated into a cardiovascular system that was already optimized. The pain was beyond description. Even with the highest grade anesthetics available, with pain suppressors and neural blocks, the agony of having one's body forcibly transformed was something that Calgar would later speak of only in the vaguest terms. The procedure lasted for days. Calgar's enhanced physiology, the only thing that kept him alive as the apothecaries cut, implanted, sealed, and modified. Multiple times his heart stopped. Multiple times the Belisarian furnace, newly implanted, had to kick in and pull him back from the edge of death. It was this organ, in fact, that made the procedure survivable at all. Without the furnace's emergency intervention, the shock of the transformation would have killed even a warrior of Calgar's caliber. When it was over, when Calgar finally opened his eyes and took his first breaths as a Primaris Marine, he was different. Physically larger, his already imposing frame now standing taller, broader, more massive. Stronger, with power that exceeded even his previous considerable capabilities. More resilient, able to withstand damage that would have grievously wounded him before. But the change was not just physical. Calgar reported an enhanced clarity of thought, an even greater resistance to the corrupting influence of the warp, a sharpening of senses that were already far beyond human. The success of Calgar's crossing changed everything. Within the Ultramarines, others began to volunteer for the Rubicon. Veterans who wanted to serve their chapter with even greater capability, who saw in the procedure a way to extend their usefulness beyond what their firstborn physiology allowed. The success rate improved as apothecaries gained experience with the procedure, as techniques were refined and protocols established. Other chapters heard of what the Ultramarines had achieved, and warriors across the Imperium began to face the same choice. But crossing the Rubicon is never without risk, never without cost. Even with improved techniques, the mortality rate remains significant. Not all bodies can accept the transformation. Some warriors die on the table, their enhanced physiology pushed beyond even its considerable limits. Others survive the surgery only to face complications in the recovery period. Organs that do not integrate properly, systems that fail to synchronize. And even for those who survive and successfully complete the transformation, there is the psychological weight of having been unmade and remade, of having your existence as you knew it ended and replaced with something new. For a firstborn Marine to undergo the Rubicon is to acknowledge that what you were is no longer enough. It is to choose temporary death, to allow yourself to be taken apart and rebuilt, trusting in the skill of apothecaries and the resilience of your own enhanced flesh. It is to wake up in a body that feels both familiar and alien, to discover that you are taller, that your strength has increased, that sensory input has changed in subtle but noticeable ways. For warriors who have existed in their firstborn bodies for decades or centuries, this adjustment is profound. Some embrace it immediately, rejoicing in the enhanced capabilities, in the feeling of renewed vigor that the Primaris organs provide. They throw themselves into combat with the enthusiasm of newly initiated brothers, eager to test the limits of their transformed physiology. Others struggle with the change, finding themselves having to relearn movements and techniques they had perfected over lifetimes of service, adjusting to reach that is longer, to strength that is greater, to a body that responds differently to the same commands. There is also the question of identity. A Space Marine's relationship with their body is complex, shaped by decades of conditioning that teaches them to view flesh as a tool, a weapon, a vessel for their service to the Emperor. But beneath that conditioning, there remains some thread of the person they were, some continuity of self that spans from the child who was selected to the warrior they became. The Rubicon severs that continuity in a way that normal Space Marine creation does not. It forces a transformation on a fully formed consciousness. Creating a before and after that is impossible to ignore. Some warriors who cross the Rubicon report feeling like they have been given a second chance, a renewal of purpose. Others speak of a sense of loss, of mourning for the body they left behind on that surgical slab, even as they recognize the advantages of what they have become. There are cases of warriors who, after crossing successfully, find themselves questioning who they are now, whether the person who underwent the procedure and the person who emerged from it are truly the same being or merely share memories. The Rubicon also changes relationships within chapters. Warriors who have crossed exist in a strange space between firstborn and those born as Primaris. They remember what it was like to be firstborn, carry the experiences and perspective of that existence, but now inhabit bodies that are Primaris. They become bridges between the two groups, able to speak to the concerns of both, to translate between experiences that are fundamentally different. Many who cross the Rubicon find themselves taking on mentorship roles, helping firstborn understand what the transformation entails, helping those born as Primaris understand the history and traditions that came before. Yet despite the risks, despite the trauma, despite the questions of identity and belonging, the Rubicon Primaris represents hope. It means that veteran warriors need not fade into irrelevance, that centuries of experience need not be lost simply because their bodies are not as enhanced as the newest generation. It means that the best of both worlds can be combined. The experience and tactical wisdom of the firstborn with the physical superiority of the Primaris. And in an Imperium that desperately needs every advantage, every edge against enemies that threaten from all sides, the Rubicon has become a path that more and more warriors choose to walk, knowing full well that it might be the last choice they ever make. Physical existence. Living in enhanced flesh. To be a Primaris, Marine is to exist in a body that has been engineered for war. Every moment of every day, you are aware of capabilities that dwarf those of baseline humans. You stand between 8 and 10 feet tall in your armor, taller than most humans, even when unarmored. Your frame is massive, broad across the shoulders, thick with muscle that exists in densities that natural evolution would never produce. Your bones are harder than ceramite, your blood more efficient than the finest Imperial technology, your senses sharper than those of apex predators. But this existence is not the power fantasy that propaganda suggests. Living in an enhanced body means constant adjustment, constant awareness of the gulf between you and humanity. When you move through spaces designed for baseline humans, you must be careful. Doorways that would accommodate normal people require you to duck or turn sideways. Furniture that would support ordinary weight crumples under your mass. Objects designed for human hands feel fragile in your grip, likely to shatter if you forget for even a moment the strength contained in your fingers. Your senses overwhelm you with information. The oculobe allows you to see in near darkness, to spot details at distances that would require telescopes for normal humans. But it also means you perceive far more than you might want to. You see the decay in structures, the micro expressions on faces, the minute details of every environment you occupy. The lineman's ear grants hearing so acute that you can track movement through walls, but it also means you are constantly bombarded with sounds that others never notice. The distant conversations, the machinery humming in walls, the breathing of people in adjacent rooms. The neuroglottis transforms taste and smell into reconnaissance tools, but it makes every meal an analysis of chemical composition rather than simple sustenance. You taste the preservatives in food, smell the exhaust in air, detect toxins and contamination that would be invisible to baseline senses. Even the presence of other people becomes a sensory experience, their pheromones and chemical signatures readable to senses that were never meant to perceive such things. Sleep, such as it is, becomes something different for a space marine. The catalepsian node allows portions of your brain to rest while others remain alert, meaning you never truly sleep the way humans do. You can go weeks without full rest, your consciousness always partially active, always monitoring, always ready. But this constant semi-wakefulness means you never experience the deep, dreamless sleep that allows baseline humans to fully disengage from their surroundings. Some Marines speak of missing dreams, of the way true sleep allowed escape from duty, even briefly. As a Primaris Marine, that escape is gone. You are always on, always processing, always aware. Your metabolism operates at a level that requires constant fueling. You consume quantities of food that would sustain a normal family, and even then, your body is always on the edge of demanding more. The organs implanted in you are in constant operation, burning through nutrients, requiring maintenance through specialized chemical treatments and nutritional supplements. You are a biological machine of war, and like any machine, you require fuel and upkeep to function at peak efficiency. The sheer strength you possess requires constant conscious control. You must learn to modulate your force for different situations, to understand that the grip that allows you to crush an enemy's throat will destroy the hand of a comrade you mean to help up, will shatter the tools you mean to use.
You know, when I first started diving deep into Primaris lore for this channel, I'll admit I was skeptical. It felt like a corporate decision more than a narrative one. But the more I researched their actual experience, the conditioning, the isolation, the weight they carry, I started seeing them differently. These aren't just bigger space marines with better gear. They're warriors dealing with an identity crisis on a fundamental level, caught between what they were created to be and what the Imperium needs them to become. It's honestly one of the more tragic elements in 40K when you really sit with it. The propaganda shows angels of death, but the reality is so much more complicated and, frankly, more human than we give them credit for. But anyways, let's get back to the story.
Young Primaris Marines go through extensive training in fine motor control, learning to write with hands that can bend steel, to operate delicate equipment with fingers that could punch through armor plating. Pain, when it comes, is processed differently. Your nervous system has been modified to allow you to function through trauma that would incapacitate or kill ordinary humans. You can be shot, stabbed, burned, and continue fighting, your consciousness remaining clear even as your body sustains catastrophic damage. But this means you experience pain in a removed way, aware of damage without being overwhelmed by it. Some Marines speak of this as a blessing, allowing them to focus on mission completion rather than injury. Others describe it as disturbing, feeling their body take damage and responding almost intellectually rather than viscerally, analyzing wounds the way a tech priest might assess damage to a machine. The Belisarian furnace adds another layer to this experience. You carry within your chest an organ that might, at any moment, pull you back from death itself. But this emergency system comes with its own terror. Marines who have experienced furnace activation describe it as dying and being forcibly reborn. The sensation of systems shutting down, followed by violent resurrection. Chemicals flooding through you with such intensity that the line between salvation and destruction becomes impossible to determine. Some warriors try to prevent their furnace from activating during evacuation from battle, knowing that while it might give them moments of additional combat capability, the physiological cost could finish what enemies started. Your appearance separates you from humanity in ways both subtle and overt. Even unarmored, you are clearly not human in the baseline sense. Your proportions are off, your frame too large, your movements possessing a fluid power that speaks of capabilities no natural body should possess. Children who see you without your armor sometimes cry, instinctively recognizing that while you may have started as human, you are no longer entirely so. Adults react with awe, fear, reverence, but rarely with the easy camaraderie one might show a fellow person. You are set apart, marked by your very existence as something other. The black carapace, that final implant beneath your skin, creates an interface that is both remarkable and disturbing. When you don your armor, neural spikes penetrate the ports in your flesh, connecting directly to your nervous system. The armor's machine spirit merges with your consciousness, its sensors becoming extensions of your senses, its servos responding to thoughts as much as to muscle movement. You become a fusion of flesh and ceramite, neither fully organic nor fully mechanical, but something that exists in the space between. Yet this constant interface means you are never truly separate from your armor. Even when you remove it, you feel its absence, a phantom weight that your body expects, a connection that your nervous system seeks. Many Marines speak of feeling more complete in their armor than out of it, of the strange vulnerability that comes with being unarmored. Not because they are physically weaker, but because they have become so accustomed to the merger of flesh and machine that separation feels like losing part of themselves. Your healing is rapid by any standard, wounds closing at rates that would seem miraculous to baseline humans. The Laraman cells in your bloodstream form instant patches over injuries, sealing them from infection and allowing you to continue functioning. But this also means you heal imperfectly, scar tissue forming quickly without the careful knitting that slower healing would provide. Many veteran Primaris Marines carry bodies covered in scar tissue, the marks of hundreds of battles layered upon flesh that has been torn and repaired so many times it becomes a map of violence. The Primaris enhancements magnify all of these experiences. The sinew coils mean that you feel metal within your muscles, a sensation that never quite becomes familiar, a reminder with every movement that your strength is not entirely organic. The Magnificat pushes every gene seed organ to greater expression, meaning all the enhanced capabilities are dialed higher, all the differences from baseline humanity more pronounced. You are not simply larger than firstborn Marines, you are noticeably, significantly larger, requiring specially fitted armor, weapons scaled to your increased size and strength. Living in this body means understanding that you are a weapon first and a person second. Everything about your physical existence has been optimized for combat, for killing enemies of the Emperor, for surviving conditions that would destroy lesser beings. But this optimization comes at the cost of being able to exist comfortably in any other context. You cannot simply walk through a civilian population without causing disruption. You cannot interact with normal humans without constant awareness of the danger you pose to them. You cannot forget, even for a moment, that your body is a loaded weapon, always on the verge of firing. And perhaps most profound is the knowledge that this body will outlast almost anything else in your life. Barring death in combat, you will exist in this enhanced flesh for centuries. You will watch normal humans age and die, generations passing while you remain. You will see the Imperium change around you while your body remains essentially static, locked in the enhanced physicality granted by organs that do not age as normal tissue does. You are, in many ways, removed from the normal human experience of time itself, existing in a body that will carry you through centuries of service until combat finally claims you, or you are interred in the sarcophagus of a dreadnought, extending your consciousness even further beyond normal human lifespan. This is the physical reality of being a Primaris Marine. It is existence in a body that is superior to baseline humanity in every measurable way, but it is also existence in a body that can never fully return to humanity, that marks you as separate, as other, as a tool of war that thinks and feels, but can never escape what it was created to be. Training and indoctrination, forging the mind. The physical transformation from human to Primaris marine is only half of the creation process. Equally important, and perhaps more fundamental to what a space marine becomes, is the mental conditioning that shapes their consciousness into something that can utilize the enhanced body effectively while maintaining loyalty to the emperor and chapter. The training and indoctrination that aspirants undergo is designed not just to teach combat skills, but to reshape the very architecture of thought, to create minds that can function in ways baseline humans cannot, that can process the trauma of constant warfare without breaking, that can kill without hesitation and obey without question. Hypno-indoctrination begins early in the creation process, often around the time when the first organs are being implanted. The aspirant is placed in a machine called a hypnomat, restrained and subjected to a carefully designed program of visual and auditory stimuli while in a hypnotic state. These sessions can last for hours, the aspirant's mind opened and malleable, receiving programming that will shape their neural pathways for the rest of their existence. The content varies by chapter, each organization imprinting its own doctrines, histories, and tactical knowledge, but the fundamental goal remains the same: to create warriors whose first instinct is to fight, whose loyalty to the emperor supersedes all other considerations, whose sense of self is bound completely to their role as weapons of the Imperium. The hypno-indoctrination does more than simply teach. It fundamentally alters how the brain processes information and responds to stimuli. Fear responses are blunted or eliminated entirely. Pain tolerance is increased through neural conditioning that teaches the mind to categorize physical trauma as data to be processed rather than experience to be avoided. Hesitation in combat, that split-second pause that keeps baseline humans from inflicting violence, is stripped away and replaced with reflexive aggression toward identified enemies. The programming instills an almost instinctive understanding of tactics and strategy, implanting knowledge that would take normal humans years of study to acquire. But this conditioning comes at a cost. The hypno-indoctrination can blur or even erase childhood memories, the life before selection fading into hazy impressions that feel more like stories heard than experiences lived. Some Marines retain clear memories of their pre-Astartes existence, but for many, the intensive neural programming creates a discontinuity between who they were and who they became. The person who entered the chapter's care and the warrior who emerged are connected by biological continuity, but separated by radical mental restructuring. Memory training forms a crucial component of Space Marine indoctrination. The enhanced brains of Astartes are capable of near-perfect recall when properly trained, able to store and retrieve information with a fidelity that seems impossible by baseline standards. Marines learn to remember every face they see, every tactical situation they encounter, every detail of every battle. This eidetic memory serves multiple purposes. It allows warriors to learn from experience with perfect clarity, to analyze past engagements, and apply those lessons to future conflicts. It enables them to retain vast amounts of tactical data, operational procedures, and chapter lore without need for external records. But this perfect memory also means that Marines forget nothing. Every death witnessed, every atrocity experienced, every horror encountered in the endless wars of the 42nd Millennium is stored with pristine clarity. Veterans who have served for centuries carry within their minds perfect recall of thousands of battles, of thousands of deaths, of violence beyond measure. The training teaches them to compartmentalize these memories, to access them when needed for tactical analysis while preventing emotional overwhelm. But the memories remain, a growing weight of experience that never truly fades. Physical training begins even as the organs are being implanted and continues throughout the aspirant's development. The training is brutal by any standard, designed to push enhanced bodies to their limits and beyond. Aspirants fight each other in training cages, learning to wield their new strength while controlling it enough not to accidentally kill battle brothers. They train with weapons that weigh more than baseline humans, learning to fire bolters with accuracy while absorbing recoil that would shatter normal shoulders, to swing chainswords that must be maintained with ritual precision, to throw grenades with trajectories calculated by enhanced minds. The training is not simply about individual combat skills. Space Marines fight as coordinated units, and aspirants must learn to operate as part of a squad, to trust their brothers with their lives, to execute complex tactical maneuvers under fire. They practice boarding actions in mock-up ship corridors, urban warfare in constructed kill houses, open-field combat in terrain that shifts and changes. They learn to fight in void, in toxic atmospheres, underwater, in conditions that would kill unprotected humans in seconds. They train until their enhanced bodies move with perfect efficiency, until weapon handling becomes as natural as breathing, until combat itself becomes a state more familiar than peace. For those born as Primaris Marines, the training includes an extended period in the 10th Company, where they serve as scouts and learn the full range of vanguard combat techniques. This is a stark difference from some firstborn traditions, where scouts were aspirants still completing their transformation. Primaris scouts are full-fledged Space Marines, utilizing specialized infiltration and reconnaissance skills. They learn to operate behind enemy lines, to conduct precision strikes, to gather intelligence while remaining undetected. This comprehensive training in vanguard tactics means that every Primaris Marine, regardless of which company they eventually join, carries skills in stealth and covert operations that previous generations might have lacked. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Space Marine conditioning is the indoctrination into chapter culture and the Imperial Creed. Each chapter maintains its own traditions, its own interpretation of what it means to serve the Emperor. Aspirants are immersed in chapter lore, taught the deeds of heroes past, made to memorize the names and actions of every great warrior who bore the chapter's colors. They learn the chapter's specific combat doctrines, whether that involves the rigid adherence to Guilliman's Codex Astartes, practiced by the Ultramarines, or the more individualistic approaches of chapters like the Space Wolves or Blood Angels. Religious indoctrination varies between chapters, but universally emphasizes absolute loyalty to the Emperor. Marines are taught that the Emperor is not merely a political ruler, but a god figure who sacrificed his own well-being for humanity's survival, who endures eternal suffering on the Golden Throne so that mankind might persist. This religious fervor provides psychological armor against the horrors they will face when confronting demons of the warp or the corrupting influence of chaos. Faith becomes a weapon as potent as any bolter. The indoctrination instills the belief that to serve the Emperor, even unto death, is the highest purpose any being can achieve. For Primaris Marines specifically, there is an additional layer of indoctrination related to their creation and purpose. Those awakened from Call's laboratories after 10,000 years of stasis emerged with programming that had focused them into single roles. The first wave of Primaris were intercessors, aggressors, hellblasters, each type trained to excel in one specific tactical function. They were veterans of nothing but hypno-indoctrination and simulated combat, but they emerged with the tactical knowledge and technical proficiency of seasoned warriors. This specialization was both strength and weakness. They could perform their designated roles with near-perfect efficiency, but they lacked the tactical flexibility that comes from progression through different squad types and combat situations. The psychological impact of this specialized indoctrination revealed itself in early deployments during the Indomitus Crusade. Primaris Marines, who had been programmed for specific roles, sometimes struggled when combat situations required adaptation outside their specialty. They had the capability to learn, but the initial conditioning had created rigid tactical thinking in some cases. This led to modifications in how later generations of Primaris were trained, incorporating more varied combat experience and cross-training in multiple specialties to develop the adaptability that the Imperium needed in its warriors. There is also the matter of mental conditioning regarding pain and death. Space Marines are conditioned to accept their own mortality while simultaneously fighting against it with every fiber of their being. They know they will almost certainly die in combat. The statistical reality of endless warfare makes this inevitable, but they are trained not to fear this death, to view it instead as the ultimate service, the final gift they can offer to the Emperor and humanity. This conditioning allows them to charge into situations that any sane being would flee, to make sacrifices that require the willing acceptance of death. Yet the conditioning is not perfect. Space Marines are still, at their core, beings with consciousness, with some thread of individuality that persists despite the indoctrination. They can doubt, can question, can feel fear, even if they are trained not to show it. The mental architecture imposed by training and hypno-conditioning provides a framework, but it does not completely erase the person underneath. This creates an internal tension in many Marines, the conflict between what they were programmed to be and what they remain as thinking, feeling beings. Some chapters, particularly those like the Grey Knights who face the direct horrors of chaos, take mental conditioning to even more extreme levels. They may completely erase a recruit's previous identity, rebuilding the consciousness from nothing to create warriors who are psychologically incorruptible. But even in less extreme cases, the training and indoctrination create minds that are fundamentally different from baseline human psychology. Space Marines think faster, process more information simultaneously, react to combat situations with speed that seems precognitive. But they also think differently in terms of morality, value, and purpose. They are shaped by their conditioning to view existence through the lens of their duty, to measure worth in terms of service to the Emperor. The mental conditioning also affects how Space Marines relate to baseline humans. They are taught to protect humanity, to view themselves as shields standing between civilization and the darkness. But this protective role comes with an implicit hierarchy. Marines are superior, elevated above ordinary humans by their enhancement and conditioning. They are taught to value human life in the abstract, humanity as a whole. But individual humans become almost irrelevant, except as either assets to be protected or obstacles to be removed. This creates a psychological distance, a separation that means even the most humanitarian chapter struggles to truly connect with the people they defend. For those firstborn who cross the Rubicon Primaris, the additional conditioning is minimal compared to the physical transformation. Their minds have already been shaped by decades or centuries of service. But they must undergo some degree of psychological adjustment to their new bodies, learning to think as Primaris Marines, to utilize enhanced capabilities that weren't present before. This adjustment is often easier than the physical transformation because the fundamental mental architecture is already in place. They are already Space Marines. They are merely learning to be Primaris Space Marines. The end result of this exhaustive training and indoctrination is a mind that can utilize the enhanced body effectively while remaining loyal, focused, and functional, despite exposure to horrors that would shatter normal psychology. But it is also a mind that has been shaped, limited, directed toward specific purposes. The training creates warriors of incredible capability, but it also creates beings who struggle to exist outside the context of war, who find civilian life almost incomprehensible, who are most comfortable when killing and being shot at because that is what their entire existence has prepared them for. Daily life and brotherhood. When you imagine Space Marines, you probably envision them in the midst of glorious battle, bolters roaring, chainswords carving through enemy ranks. But combat, even in the endless wars of the 42nd millennium, is not constant. Between deployments there exists something that could be called daily life, though it bears little resemblance to civilian existence. To understand what it means to be a Primaris Marine, you must understand not just the horror of the battlefield, but also the grinding routine of life in a chapter, the relationships with battle brothers, the rituals and traditions that give structure to existence when not actively killing. Life aboard a Space Marine vessel or within a fortress monastery follows strict patterns. The day, such as it is in void travel where time becomes arbitrary, is divided into segments of prayer, training, maintenance, and study. There is little leisure in the civilian sense. A Space Marine's purpose is to serve, and even time not spent in active combat is spent preparing for the next deployment. Morning, or what passes for it in the timeless environment of a ship or sealed fortress, begins with prayer. The specifics vary by chapter, but nearly all Space Marines engage in devotional practices that reinforce their conditioning and purpose. Marines gather in chapel spaces, their voices raised in hymns that echo off stone or metal walls, their words pledges of loyalty to the Emperor and commitment to their duty. For some chapters, these prayers are fervent, almost ecstatic expressions of faith. For others, they are quiet, meditative recitations. But whether loud or soft, the prayers serve to center the Marines, to remind them what they fight for, to maintain the psychological foundation that allows them to continue functioning. After prayer comes physical training. Though for beings who already possess superhuman capabilities, this is not simple exercise. Space Marines train to maintain peak combat efficiency, drilling in full armor, practicing with live ammunition when possible, engaging in melee combat that would kill normal participants. Primaris Marines train with the specialized weapons of their role, intercessors drilling with bolt rifles until they can field strip and reassemble them in absolute darkness. Hellblasters practicing the delicate balance of maximizing plasma weapon output without causing catastrophic overload. Reavers perfecting the terror tactics and shock assault techniques that define their battlefield role. Combat drills take place in specialized training areas, some physical and others virtual. Modern Space Marine vessels and fortresses often include simulation chambers where Marines can fight in virtualized environments, facing computer-generated opponents that mimic everything from simple greenskin hordes to the complex tactics of Eldar raiders. These simulations allow Marines to practice coordination and tactics without the resource expenditure of live-fire exercises, though most chapters ensure their warriors regularly engage in actual combat training as well, because simulation can never fully replicate the chaos and brutality of real warfare. Maintenance forms another crucial part of daily routine. A Space Marine's war gear represents technology worth more than many Imperial citizens will see in their entire lives. The sacred ceramite of their armor, the blessed weapons they carry, the specialized equipment granted by the Mechanicus, all require constant care and ritual maintenance. Marines spend hours each day attending to their gear, cleaning weapons with oils blessed by Tech Marines, repairing minor damage to armor, conducting the rites that appease machine spirits. This maintenance is not simply practical, but spiritual, a demonstration of respect for the tools that keep them alive and effective. For many Marines, this maintenance time becomes meditative, a space where the mind can process experiences while hands perform familiar rituals. Veterans teach newer Marines the proper methods, passing down techniques that have been refined over generations. The maintenance rituals also serve as expressions of chapter culture. Some chapters approach gear maintenance with religious fervor, treating each piece of equipment as a holy artifact. Others view it more practically, but still with deep respect for the tools of their trade. Study and strategic planning occupy significant portions of time between deployments. Space Marines are not simple weapons to be pointed at enemies. They are tactical thinkers, students of warfare who must understand strategy and logistics. Marines study past campaigns, analyzing successes and failures to extract lessons for future application. They review intelligence on potential enemies, learning the capabilities and tactics of every xenospecies and chaos warband they might face. They study the Codex Astartes for chapters that follow it. debating interpretations of Guilliman's tactical wisdom, or they study their chapter's own doctrines for those who have diverged from the Codex. Primaris Marines in particular spend time mastering the technical aspects of their more advanced war gear. The Mark X armor, with its modular design, requires understanding of how different configurations affect combat capabilities. The variety of Primaris weapon systems, from the different bolt rifle patterns to plasma incinerators to more specialized weapons, each demands study and practice. The newer vehicles like repulsor tanks with their anti-gravitic drives represent technology that requires technical knowledge to operate effectively. But perhaps most important in daily life are the relationships between battle brothers. A Space Marine spends more time with their squad than with any other beings in the universe. These become the closest relationships most Marines ever form, bonds forged in combat and maintained through shared ritual and purpose. Squads develop their own internal cultures, personalities that emerge from the combination of individual warriors. Some squads are boisterous, filling their non-combat time with competitive challenges and aggressive camaraderie. Others are quiet, contemplative, their bonds expressed through looks and small gestures rather than constant interaction. The relationship between Primaris and Firstborn Battle Brothers in mixed chapters adds complexity to these squad dynamics. Early in the integration of Primaris into existing chapters, there was often tension. Firstborn Marines, who had served for decades or centuries, found themselves fighting alongside warriors who lacked combat experience despite their physical superiority. Primaris Marines, particularly those awakened from stasis, sometimes struggled to understand chapter traditions and culture that they had not been part of developing. These tensions played out in training, in strategic discussions, in the small frictions of daily life. But combat has a way of burning away such concerns. When bolts are flying and enemies pressing close, what matters is whether your battle brother can be relied upon, whether they will stand their ground, whether they fight with skill and courage. Primaris Marines who prove themselves in battle find acceptance from Firstborn brothers. Veterans who share their hard-won wisdom earn respect from Primaris, who recognize the value of experience. Over time, the distinction between Primaris and Firstborn becomes less important than the shared purpose of serving the chapter. Squad meals provide another point of connection, though the experience of eating for Space Marines differs significantly from civilian dining. Marines can survive on nutrient paste alone, their enhanced digestive systems extracting everything needed from even the most unappetizing substances. But many chapters maintain traditions around shared meals, recognizing the psychological and social importance of breaking bread together. The food is fuel, certainly, but the act of eating as a squad, of sharing this necessary but routine activity, reinforces bonds and provides structure. During meals, Marines share stories of past battles, offer advice on tactical problems, engage in the verbal sparring that passes for humor among warriors who have seen too much death to laugh easily at gentle things. Senior Marines use meal times to assess younger brothers, to gauge morale and identify potential problems before they manifest in combat. It is also one of the rare times when the rigid hierarchy of rank relaxes slightly, when a sergeant can speak with his squad as brothers rather than as subordinates. Recreation, such as it exists, tends to be competitive and martial. Some chapters maintain training cages where Marines can engage in unarmed combat for honor or resolution of disputes. Others have shooting ranges where warriors compete for accuracy, or dueling circles where blades clash in carefully controlled contests. These activities serve dual purposes, both maintaining combat readiness and providing outlets for the aggressive tendencies that have been cultivated and enhanced by conditioning. Some chapters maintain traditions of art or scholarship. The Blood Angels are famous for their pursuit of beauty, many of their warriors engaging in painting, sculpture, or poetry between battles. This artistic tradition serves as a counterbalance to the chapter's darker nature, the red thirst and black rage that haunt their gene line. Other chapters maintain libraries where Marines can study history, philosophy, or technical knowledge, though always with an eye toward how such learning might be applied to their duty. Religious observance forms another constant thread through daily life. Beyond the morning prayers, Marines regularly attend services conducted by chaplains, confessing doubts or fears, receiving blessings before deployment, honoring fallen brothers. These religious practices provide psychological support, reinforcing the faith that serves as armor against chaos and justification for the violence they inflict. The specific forms vary between chapters, some treating the emperor as a distant god figure, others as a more intimate presence in their lives, but the underlying devotion remains constant. The fortress monastery, or strike cruiser that serves as home, contains spaces dedicated to honoring the chapter's history and fallen warriors. Marines walk halls lined with the names and deeds of those who came before, their own future deaths prefigured in these memorials. New Primaris Marines learn the names of ancient heroes, absorbing the chapter's legacy, understanding the weight of tradition they now carry. These halls of remembrance serve as both inspiration and warning, celebrating sacrifice while acknowledging the price that service demands. For Primaris Marines specifically, daily life includes adjustments to cultural traditions they may not have been part of during their creation. Those awakened from stasis after 10,000 years must learn chapter traditions that evolved during their sleep. Those recruited and raised as Primaris must be integrated into practices that may have been established before their enhancement. This creates learning curves, moments where Primaris Marines must ask about significance of rituals, must be taught traditions that firstborn absorbed over years of service. Most chapters handle this integration with understanding, recognizing that cultural knowledge takes time to acquire. Yet beneath all the structure and ritual, beneath the training and maintenance and prayer, there exists the fundamental reality that Space Marines are warriors waiting for war. The daily routine provides purpose and prevents deterioration of skills, but it is not what they were created for. Many Marines, particularly those who have served long enough to experience extended periods without deployment, speak of restlessness during these times. They are weapons, and a weapon unused is a weapon failing its purpose. This creates a strange relationship with combat. Marines dread battle in the sense that they understand its costs, have seen too many brothers fall, carry too many scars. But they also crave it, because battle is where their training and enhancement find expression, where their existence achieves meaning. The daily life between deployments is necessary, but it is the spaces between notes in a symphony, important for structure, but not what anyone came to hear. The music, terrible as it is, plays only when the bolters speak and the chainswords roar. So daily life for a Primaris Marine becomes a cycle of preparation, maintenance, waiting, and deployment. It is existence focused entirely on the next battle, the next opportunity to fulfill purpose. It is routine that would be crushing in its monotony to baseline humans, but that Space Marines embrace, because the alternative, having no purpose, having no battles to prepare for, would be far worse. They were made for war, and in the spaces between wars, they prepare to be the weapons they were designed to become: equipment and arsenal, tools of war. A Primaris Marine's war gear represents some of the most sophisticated technology that the Imperium can produce. Every piece of equipment, from the armor that encases them to the weapons they wield, is the product of millennia of development, blessed by the Mechanicus, maintained with religious devotion. To understand what it means to be a Primaris Marine, you must understand not just the warrior, but the tools that transform enhanced flesh into an engine of destruction, capable of standing against the galaxy's horrors. The Mark X power armor is where this understanding must begin. This is not simply protective equipment, it is a second skin that transforms a Primaris Marine into a walking fortress. The armor stands as one of the most significant advances in Space Marine war gear since the Heresy. designed by Belisarius Caul to take advantage of the Primaris Marine's enhanced physiology while incorporating technological improvements that had been developed over 10,000 years. The Mark X is modular in a way previous armor patterns were not. It comes in several distinct variants, each optimized for different tactical roles. The Tacticus pattern serves as the foundation, a balanced design that offers excellent protection while maintaining mobility. This is the armor worn by intercessors and most battlefield roles, combining the best elements of Heresy-era armor with modern innovations. Its ceramite plates are thicker than previous marks, able to withstand hits that would penetrate older armor, while servo motors that drive the joints operate with complete silence, eliminating the telltale whir that characterized earlier power armor. The black carapace, that final gene seed organ implanted beneath the skin, transforms the Mark X from equipment into an extension of self. Neural ports across the Marine's body connect to interface spikes in the armor, creating direct pathways between the suit's machine spirit and the wearer's nervous system. When fully connected, a Primaris Marine doesn't control the armor through physical movement alone. They think, and the armor responds. The suit's sensors feed directly into enhanced perception, creating a sensory network that extends beyond the body to encompass the armor's entire surface. You don't just wear Mark X armor, you become it, your consciousness expanding to fill the ceramite shell. This neural connection provides advantages that external armor could never achieve. Response times between thought and action reduced to near instantaneous, the armor moving with the Marine rather than lagging behind physical movement. The suit's auto-senses, the collective term for its sensor systems, feed data directly into the Marine's perception. The helmet's visor displays tactical information overlaid onto vision, range calculations, ammunition counts, target recognition systems that highlight enemies and identify allies. All of this information flows into the Marine's consciousness as naturally as sight or hearing, processed by enhanced brains without overwhelming cognitive function. The Phobos pattern represents another Mark X variant, designed specifically for vanguard operations. Lighter and more streamlined than Tacticus, Phobos sacrifices some protection for enhanced mobility and stealth capabilities. The servo motors are even quieter, the armor's profile designed to minimize visibility. Marines wearing Phobos can infiltrate enemy territory, moving through shadows and conducting reconnaissance that would be impossible in heavier armor. Vanguard Marines, the infiltrators and incursors and reavers, rely on Phobos to get them into position unseen, to strike from unexpected angles, to be ghosts that kill and disappear before enemies can respond. The Gravis pattern goes in the opposite direction, sacrificing mobility for protection, approaching that of Terminator armor. Massively built, with armor plates so thick they can shrug off weapons that would devastate Tacticus wearers. Gravis turns Primaris Marines into walking tanks. Aggressors wear this pattern. They're tasked to advance into the most concentrated enemy fire and survive long enough to close to effective range. Heavy intercessors utilize Gravis to create mobile fire bases, their enhanced protection allowing them to hold ground that would be untenable for less armored Marines. The weight and bulk make Gravis unsuitable for rapid maneuver, but when positioned correctly, it turns its wearers into immovable objects that enemy forces break against. Omnis pattern combines elements of both Phobos and Gravis, a curious hybrid designed for jump pack assault troops. It must balance protection with weight considerations, must allow the mobility needed for aerial assault while providing enough armor to survive landing in the midst of enemy formations. Inceptor Marines wear Omnis, their role to descend from the sky like angels of death. Suppression fire from their weapons clearing landing zones before they touch down and engage directly. But armor is only part of the Primaris arsenal. Their weapons represent parallel development, improvements over the patterns that firstborn Marines have wielded for millennia. The bolt rifle, the iconic firearm of the Primaris Marine, is a refinement of the bolter that has served Space Marines since the Great Crusade. Longer-barreled, more accurate, with greater range and stopping power, the bolt rifle is both familiar and improved. It fires the same mass-reactive bolts that have been ripping through enemy armor for 10,000 years, but it does so with enhanced precision and at greater distances. The Mark II call pattern bolt rifle comes in several variants, each optimized for different tactical situations. The standard pattern provides balanced performance, accuracy at medium ranges with the stopping power to devastate most targets. The auto-bolt rifle trades range for rate of fire, becoming a fully automatic weapon that can lay down suppressing fire or cut through light infantry at close quarters. The Stalker bolt rifle extends range dramatically, turning intercessors into marksmen capable of engaging targets at distances that would challenge dedicated snipers. Every bolt fired from these rifles is a miniature missile. The bolt penetrates the target's surface armor, then detonates inside, the explosion tearing apart flesh and machinery from within. Against unarmored targets, the effect is catastrophically destructive, bodies coming apart in explosions of blood and tissue. Against armored targets, the penetration followed by internal detonation creates damage that external explosions could never achieve. The sound of a bolt rifle firing, that distinctive crack thump as propellant drives the bolt free before its rocket engine ignites, becomes a promise of death to anyone in its path. Plasma weaponry represents another significant part of the Primaris arsenal, particularly for Hellblasters. Plasma weapons fire superheated gas held together by magnetic fields, creating projectiles that can punch through the heaviest armor. The Mark III Belisarius pattern plasma incinerator that Hellblasters wield is more stable than earlier plasma weapons, less prone to catastrophic overload, but still carrying the inherent danger of all plasma technology. Marines who wield these weapons learn to walk the line between maximum output and safe operation, knowing that pushing the weapon too hard can result in it exploding with enough force to kill the wielder. The psychological weight of carrying a weapon that might kill you, even as you kill your enemies, cannot be overstated. Every time a Hellblaster engages overcharge mode, seeking the increased damage output that makes plasma weapons so effective against heavily armored targets, they do so knowing that weapon malfunction could end their existence as surely as enemy fire. It requires a particular mindset, a willingness to accept risk for tactical advantage, a trust in the weapon's machine spirit, and in your own skill at managing its temperament. Close combat weapons in the Primaris arsenal include power swords that can carve through armor with energy fields surrounding their blades, thunderhammers that deliver devastating concussive force, and chainswords that remain the iconic melee weapon of Space Marines. The chainsword, a blade lined with diamond-hard teeth that rotate at high speed, can cut through flesh and bone with horrifying efficiency. Maintaining a chainsword requires ritual and skill, keeping the chain properly tensioned, the teeth sharp, the motor blessed and functioning. It is both practical tool and religious artifact, a weapon that connects current Primaris Marines to 10,000 years of Space Marine tradition. Specialized equipment rounds out the arsenal. Grapnel launchers allow vertical mobility, shooting magnetic grapples that can pull a fully armored Marine up sheer surfaces. Grav chutes enable controlled descents from orbital drops, spreading membranous fields that slow falls that would otherwise pulp even enhanced bodies. Auspex scanners provide enhanced environmental data, detecting enemies through walls or in conditions where even enhanced Astartes vision struggles. Each piece of equipment expands tactical options, providing tools for situations that raw strength and firepower cannot resolve. Vehicles in the Primaris arsenal represent a departure from traditional Space Marine transport and armor. The repulsor tank utilizes anti-gravitic technology to hover above the battlefield, mounting weapons platforms that can engage targets at multiple ranges simultaneously. The impulsor provides faster, lighter transport for Primaris squads who need to reach objectives quickly. The gladiator tank variants offer dedicated fire support, their weapons specialized for different tactical situations. All of these vehicles share characteristics of improved survivability and firepower compared to older designs, taking advantage of technological advances that the Mechanicus finally approved for production. But perhaps more important than the technical specifications of any particular piece of equipment is the relationship that Primaris Marines develop with their war gear. These are not disposable tools to be used and replaced. Each piece of equipment represents a connection to the chapter's history, maintained and honored through generations of service. The armor a Primaris Marine wears might have been worn by warriors before them, its surface scarred by battles fought before their creation. The weapon they carry might bear inscriptions recording kills and campaigns spanning centuries. This weight of history transforms equipment from mere tools into sacred trusts. The machine spirits that inhabit Space Marine war gear demand respect and proper treatment. While tech priests might debate the exact nature of these spirits, whether they are genuine manifestations of the Omnissiah or simply sophisticated programming achieving apparent consciousness, Space Marines accept their reality. Weapons perform better when properly blessed, when litanies are recited during maintenance, when the machine spirit is appeased through correct rituals. Armor responds more smoothly when treated with respect, when its surface is cleaned and blessed, when minor damage is repaired promptly with proper ceremony. This creates a relationship that goes beyond simple functionality. A Primaris Marine's armor becomes a partner in combat, its machine spirit working in concert with the warrior's consciousness to achieve tactical objectives. The bolt rifle becomes an extension of will, its aim influenced as much by blessing and faith as by physical skill. The chainsword sings its song of destruction more effectively when its wielder has honored the proper maintenance rituals, has appeased the weapon's spirit through correct treatment. New Primaris Marines must learn not just the technical operation of their equipment, but the spiritual dimension as well. They must learn the proper prayers for activation, the correct methods for cleaning and repair, the rituals that honor machine spirits and request their cooperation. Veterans pass down these practices, each chapter maintaining its own variations on the fundamental rituals that the Mechanicus provides. Some chapters approach this spiritual relationship with deep religious fervor, others with more practical reverence, but all acknowledge that proper treatment of equipment is as important as tactical skill. The result is a synthesis of warrior and war gear that transcends simple tool use. A fully equipped Primaris Marine is not a person wearing armor and carrying weapons. They are a unified combat system, flesh and machine, and faith merged into something greater than the sum of components. The armor extends their reach and protection. The weapons extend their will to destroy. The equipment extends their ability to operate in any environment. Together, they become what the Imperium desperately needs: angels of death capable of standing against the galaxy's nightmares and, sometimes, prevailing. First deployment, the Indomitus Crusade. The true test of what it means to be a Primaris Marine arrives with first deployment. All the training, all the conditioning, all the implantation and indoctrination culminate in the moment when you step onto a battlefield for the first time and discover whether everything you have been taught will actually keep you alive. For the Primaris Marines awakened from Cald's laboratories in the aftermath of the Great Rift's opening, this moment came during the Indomitus Crusade, the galaxy-spanning military campaign that saw these new warriors deployed across the Imperium to stem the tide of chaos and Xenos forces threatening to overwhelm humanity. The awakening from stasis was itself a traumatic experience for many Primaris, who had been held in suspended animation for millennia. One moment they were undergoing the final stages of their creation, the next they were being roused from stasis in a galaxy that had changed beyond recognition. Some of these warriors could recall seeing Roboute Guilliman himself before their long sleep, could remember the era immediately following the Horus heresy. They went to sleep in an Imperium still reeling from civil war, but intact, and they woke to an Imperium divided by a literal tear in reality, beset by threats that had grown and mutated over 10,000 years. The psychological impact of this temporal displacement cannot be understated. These Marines emerged into a future they could not have imagined, among brothers who viewed them with mixture of awe and suspicion, in service to an Imperium that bore only superficial resemblance to the one they remembered. They were given no time to adjust, no period of orientation. The Imperium needed warriors immediately, and so these Primaris Marines were sorted into the unnumbered sons, great armies that fought under no specific chapter banner, but instead served directly under Reboot Guilliman's command during the initial phases of the Indomitus Crusade. The unnumbered sons represented a departure from normal Space Marine organization. Traditional chapters maintain strict structure, companies and squads that train together, fight together, develop bonds and tactics through shared experience. But the unnumbered sons, later called Grey Shields in honor of their grey armor, were warriors from different genetic lineages, drawn from the gene seed of all 9 loyal Primarchs, fighting alongside brothers they had just met. This created both opportunities and challenges. On one hand, it allowed for tactical flexibility as Marines from different traditions brought different approaches to combat. On the other, it meant that the deep bonds of brotherhood that normally sustain Space Marines through horror had not yet formed. First deployment for these Grey Shields came rapidly after awakening. Fleet Primus, the largest of the Indomitus Crusade battle groups, departed Terra with Guilliman himself in command, carrying tens of thousands of Primaris Marines plus supporting forces from the Adeptus Mechanicus, Imperial Guard, and Adeptus Sororitas. Their mission was nothing less than to push back the darkness that threatened to consume the Imperium, to reclaim worlds that had fallen to chaos or Xenos control, to demonstrate that humanity would not go quietly into extinction. The first major engagement, the Battle of Gathalamor, provided brutal introduction to the reality of warfare for Primaris Marines, who had until that moment only known hypno-indoctrination and training simulations. Gathalamor, a key strategic position near Terra, had fallen to Chaos forces. Its reclamation was both tactically necessary and symbolically important, a demonstration that the Imperium could strike back. The Primaris Marines deployed into this battle with all the technical skill and tactical knowledge their conditioning had provided. They executed their roles with precision, intercessors laying down devastating fire, hellblasters carving through enemy armor, aggressors advancing into the thickest fighting. But nothing in simulation or conditioning can fully prepare a consciousness for the reality of actual combat. The first time you kill another sentient being, even an enemy, even something corrupted by chaos, there is a moment of recognition. The training takes over, the conditioning overrides hesitation, but beneath it exists awareness of what you have done. The first time you see a battle brother fall, armor cracked open, enhanced blood spilling onto alien soil, the theoretical understanding of mortality becomes visceral reality. The first time you experience actual chaos of warfare, where plans immediately collapse and survival depends on instant decision-making, the gap between training and reality becomes painfully clear. Many Primaris Marines died in these early engagements. Despite their physical superiority, despite their advanced war gear, they lacked something crucial: experience. They knew tactics, but not how those tactics fractured in contact with reality. They understood their weapons' capabilities, but not how combat situations rarely provide ideal firing conditions. They could execute maneuvers perfectly on training grounds, but struggled when terrain and enemy action made those maneuvers impossible. The early phases of the Indomitus Crusade paid for the Primaris Marines' education in blood, their own and their enemies. The veterans among the firstborn who fought alongside these new warriors watched this education with mixture of sympathy and frustration. They recognized the problem immediately. The Primaris Marines were superior physical specimens, no question. But combat effectiveness comes from more than enhanced biology. A firstborn who has fought for a century knows things that cannot be taught, has developed instincts that only experience can create. They know when to advance and when to withdraw, not through tactical calculation, but through gut feeling, honed across hundreds of engagements. They understand their enemies not from intelligence briefings, but from fighting them repeatedly, learning their patterns through painful repetition. This created tension during the early crusade. Firstborn Marines sometimes found themselves taking tactical direction from Primaris officers who, despite technically superior training, lacked the intuition that actual warfare develops. Primaris Marines, confident in their conditioning and physical capabilities, sometimes dismissed advice from firstborn who seemed smaller and weaker despite their experience. These tensions occasionally resulted in tactical mistakes, in casualties that experience might have prevented, in victories achieved at higher cost than necessary. But warfare is a harsh teacher, and the Primaris Marines learned quickly. Those who survived their first engagements began developing the instincts that training could not provide. They learned to read battlefields, to understand when a situation was developing in dangerous directions, to trust intuition that came from emerging pattern recognition. They learned from firstborn veterans who shared their hard-won knowledge, who took the time to explain the why behind tactical decisions, who mentored these physically superior but inexperienced warriors. As the Indomitus Crusade progressed through its first months and years, the Primaris Marines transformed from promising but raw recruits into genuinely effective warriors. The Grey Shields, who survived the crucible of repeated combat, became veterans in their own right, their hypno-indoctrination supplemented by actual experience. They developed the bonds with battle brothers that made Space Marine squads so effective, learning to anticipate each other's actions, to coordinate without conscious communication, to trust each other with their lives. The Crusade also taught Primaris Marines about the true nature of their enemies. Hypno-indoctrination could implant knowledge about enemy capabilities, but it could not convey the visceral horror of facing them. The first time you fight greenskins, feeling their brutal joy and violence radiating like heat, you understand why they are called the Green Tide, why they must be exterminated rather than simply defeated. The first time you face Chaos Space Marines, warriors who were once like you but who chose damnation, you feel the existential threat they represent, the warning of what happens when faith falters. Fighting Tyranids provides its own education in horror, facing a Xenos threat that exists only to consume, that adapts and evolves, that turns entire worlds into feeding grounds for incomprehensible alien hunger. Engaging Eldar teaches lessons about arrogance and speed, about enemies who were already ancient when humanity first reached the stars. Each enemy type requires different tactics, different approaches, and the Primaris Marines learned these lessons through experience that could not be simulated. The psychological impact of first deployment varies between individuals, but certain patterns emerge. Almost all Primaris Marines report a sense of revelation, of understanding, for the first time what their creation actually meant. The training had taught them how to fight, but combat taught them why they existed. They were weapons, yes, but weapons deployed against threats that made their existence necessary. The galaxy was darker and more terrible than conditioning could convey. And the Imperium's need for warriors like them was desperate and real. Some Marines emerged from first combat strengthened in faith, their belief in the Emperor's divine plan reinforced by seeing firsthand the horrors he protects humanity against. Others find their faith complicated, questioning why a benevolent deity would allow such suffering, such endless war. Most land somewhere in between, accepting that faith and doubt can coexist. That certainty is a luxury rarely afforded to those who see reality unfiltered. First deployment also reveals to Primaris Marines the cost of what they have become. In combat, you cannot hide from what your enhanced body is capable of doing. You crush enemies with bare hands, tear through flesh and bone, kill with an efficiency that is both impressive and disturbing. The conditioning prevents you from hesitating, from feeling inappropriate sympathy, but it does not completely eliminate awareness of the violence you inflict. You are death-walking, and every enemy you kill reminds you of this reality. For those Primaris Marines deployed to reinforce existing chapters rather than fighting as Grey Shields, First Combat provided introduction not just to warfare, but to chapter culture under combat conditions. They fought alongside Firstborn, who had served that chapter for decades or centuries, who embodied its traditions and history. Proving themselves worthy of their chapter colors, earning the respect of battle brothers who initially viewed them with suspicion, became as important as surviving combat itself. Many Primaris Marines speak of first deployment as when they truly became members of their chapter, when their physical presence was validated through shared blood and combat. The Indomitus Crusade continued for over a century, a grinding campaign of reclamation and reconquest that saw the Primaris Marines spread across the entire galaxy. As it progressed, the distinction between inexperienced Primaris and veteran Firstborn began to blur. The Grey Shields who survived years of combat were veterans in every meaningful sense, bearing scars and battle honors earned through repeated deployments. New generations of Primaris Marines, recruited and raised within chapters using calls techniques, progressed through their chapter's normal training structure, gaining experience through the same methods that had created Firstborn veterans. By the Crusade's conclusion at the Battle of Raukos, over a century after its beginning, the Primaris Marines had proven themselves beyond question. They had paid for their acceptance in blood, demonstrated through repeated combat that their physical enhancements translated into tactical effectiveness when coupled with experience. The remaining Grey Shields were dispersed to various chapters or formed into new ones. Their time in the unnumbered suns ended. Their identities as members of specific chapters solidified. First deployment teaches every Space Marine that war is not glorious adventure, but brutal necessity. For Primaris Marines, this lesson came with additional weight because they represented not just individual warriors, but the future of the entire Adeptus Astartes. Their success or failure would determine whether the Emperor and Guilliman's gamble, whether Call's 10,000 years of work, had been worthwhile. The fact that they succeeded, that they survived their blooding and emerged as genuine Space Marines rather than failed experiments, proved that the Primaris project had achieved its goal. But success came at cost, measured in thousands of lives, in Primaris Marines who died learning lessons that veterans already knew, in casualties that experience might have prevented. The survivors carry this weight, understand that their existence was purchased with the lives of brothers who did not survive first deployment. This creates responsibility, a sense that those who died deserve to have their sacrifice honored by those who lived. The Primaris Marines who emerge from first combat understand what they are for, and what price was paid to create them. The weight of war, psychological burdens. The propaganda images show Space Marines striding through fire without fear, their armor gleaming, their weapons held high, expressions of righteous fury on what portions of their faces are visible. What these images never show is what happens inside the helmet, inside the mind of a warrior who has been genetically engineered to fight and conditioned to endure, but who remains, at some level, a being capable of thought and feeling. The psychological burden of being a Space Marine, of living a life defined entirely by combat and service, of witnessing and inflicting horrors that would shatter normal minds, is perhaps the most carefully hidden cost of their creation. Space Marines are conditioned to endure what would break baseline humans. The hypno-indoctrination blunts emotional responses, makes fear something that can be acknowledged and then set aside, allows them to process trauma without becoming paralyzed by it. The enhanced physiology helps as well. The nervous system modifications that allow them to function through physical pain also affect how emotional pain is experienced. They are, by design, resistant to the psychological damage that combat inflicts on normal soldiers. But resistant is not the same as immune, and over years or centuries of service, even the most carefully conditioned mind accumulates weight that becomes difficult to bear. The first challenge is the constant exposure to death. Space Marines fight in the galaxy's worst conflicts, deployed where the fighting is thickest and the enemy's most dangerous. They see allies die regularly, watch baseline humans torn apart by weapons that their own enhanced bodies can barely withstand, witness entire populations exterminated by enemies who care nothing for human life. The conditioning teaches them to view individual deaths as necessary losses, to focus on tactical objectives rather than emotional responses, but it does not completely eliminate the impact of watching beings die. The death of battle brothers carries particular weight. These are warriors you have fought beside, trained with, shared the intimate space of squad life with over years or decades. When a brother falls in combat, even if you continue fighting without pause, even if tactical situation prevents any response beyond noting their death, some part of your consciousness registers the loss. The enhanced memory that Space Marines possess means they forget nothing, and this includes the faces of every brother they have watched die, every final moment they have witnessed. Veterans who have served for centuries carry within their perfect recall the deaths of hundreds or thousands of brothers. They can remember each one with pristine clarity, the specific wound that killed them, the location where they fell, the final words, if any, were spoken. This accumulation of loss creates a psychological burden that seems to defy the conditioning meant to prevent it. Some veterans become progressively more detached, their emotional responses to loss dulling through sheer, overwhelming quantity. Others seem to feel each new death as keenly as the first, carrying the weight of every loss, despite having developed no apparent tolerance. The violence that Space Marines inflict creates its own psychological burden. They are weapons designed to kill efficiently, and their conditioning removes hesitation about inflicting violence on designated enemies. But efficient killing means being aware, in detail, of what your actions do to living beings. When you crush someone's skull with your bare hand, feel bone fragmenting under your fingers, brain matter squeezing between your knuckles, you cannot avoid awareness of what you have done. When you fire into a mass of enemies and watch bodies come apart from mass reactive rounds detonating inside them, when you see the exact moment consciousness leaves dying eyes, these experiences accumulate. The conditioning provides psychological framework for processing this violence as necessary, as service to the Emperor, as defense of humanity, and for most Space Marines, this framework functions adequately most of the time. They understand that their enemies threaten the Imperium, that failure to kill them would result in greater suffering, that their violence is instrument of protection rather than simple brutality. But understanding something intellectually and carrying no psychological weight from it are different matters. Some Marines develop what might be called professional distance, treating violence as purely tactical problem solving. They kill efficiently without emotional investment, viewing enemy casualties as metrics of mission success rather than as ended lives. This approach allows them to function indefinitely, stacking up centuries of violence without apparent psychological damage. Others never achieve this distance, each kill carrying some small emotional cost that accumulates over time, even if they continue performing their duties effectively. The moral complexity of some combat situations creates additional psychological burden. Space Marines are deployed in situations where civilian casualties are inevitable, where achieving tactical objectives might require accepting collateral damage, where the choice is between bad options and worse ones. The Codex Astartes and Chapter Doctrine provide guidance, but ultimately individuals must live with the decisions made and actions taken. A Marine who calls in artillery strike on a civilian structure being used as enemy position must live with knowing that whatever human shields the enemy placed there died by his order. A squad that must abandon baseline human allies because tactical situation makes their rescue impossible carries the weight of that choice, even if it was correct. The theological dimension adds complexity to these burdens. Space Marines are taught that they serve the Emperor, that their actions advance his divine plan, that faith provides justification and psychological armor. But faith, even when reinforced by conditioning, is not always sufficient to dispel doubt. Marines see terrible things happen to innocent people, see good warriors die while corrupt humans thrive, witness injustices that seem to mock any concept of divine providence. The question of how a benevolent deity allows such suffering haunts even the faithful, and the conditioning that suppresses such doubts does not eliminate them entirely. Chaplains exist partially to address these psychological burdens, providing spiritual counsel and religious framework that helps Marines process their experiences. Warriors are encouraged to confess doubts and fears, to discuss what weighs on them with leaders trained to provide perspective and support. These sessions serve valuable purpose, helping Marines verbalize internal struggles and receive guidance rooted in chapter tradition and imperial theology. But even the best chaplain cannot remove the weight entirely, can only help warriors carry it more effectively. The constant state of readiness creates its own strain. Space Marines exist in perpetual deployment cycle. Prepare, deploy, fight, recover, prepare again. There is no civilian life to return to. No separation between their identity as warriors and their identity as people, because they are not really people anymore in baseline sense. Everything they are exists in service to combat, and this singular purpose becomes psychologically wearing, even when it is what their conditioning prepared them for. Downtime between deployments should provide psychological relief, but often it does not. Warriors who have been engaged in desperate combat find themselves restless during peaceful periods, their enhanced bodies and conditioned minds seeking the engagement they were designed for. This creates paradox. They understand they need breaks from combat for tactical and physical reasons, but psychologically, they function better when deployed. Some Marines speak of feeling more normal during combat than during peace, as if violence has become their natural state. Primaris Marines face additional psychological challenges related to their creation and purpose. Those awakened from stasis after millennia carry the burden of temporal displacement, of being men out of time surrounded by a future they barely recognize. They must reconcile memories of the Imperium they knew with reality of the Imperium that exists, must accept that everyone they knew before stasis has been dead for thousands of years, must forge new connections in a galaxy that has moved on without them. The Primaris created and raised in current era face different but related challenges. They are physically superior to firstborn Marines, but initially less experienced, creating complex relationship between capability and competence. They must prove themselves worthy of their enhancement, demonstrate that their physical advantages translate into tactical effectiveness. The pressure to perform, to justify the resources invested in their creation, to live up to the legend of what Primaris Marines were meant to be, creates psychological weight that baseline warriors never face. The relationship with baseline humanity creates another source of psychological burden. Space Marines are taught to protect humanity, but the gulf between them and the humans they protect is vast. They cannot relate to normal human concerns, cannot understand civilian existence because they have been so thoroughly removed from it. Some Marines develop what might be called protective detachment, caring about humanity in abstract, but remaining emotionally distant from individual humans. Others struggle with this distance, feeling isolated by their enhancement, separated from the humanity they were meant to defend. The knowledge that their service will likely end in violent death creates ongoing psychological pressure. Space Marines understand that they will almost certainly die in combat, that their enhanced longevity only extends how long they fight before the inevitable occurs. Some find this knowledge liberating, accepting mortality as freedom from fear of death. Others carry it as weight, each deployment potentially being the last, each goodbye to brothers potentially final. The conditioning prevents paralysis from this knowledge, but does not eliminate awareness of it. The inability to truly rest, to ever be off duty, to exist as anything other than weapons waiting for deployment, becomes psychologically exhausting over time. Even chapter traditions that encourage art or scholarship or other pursuits exist within framework of preparing for next battle. Everything a Space Marine does, every moment of their existence, ultimately relates to their function as warriors. For some, this singular focus provides clarity and purpose. For others, it becomes cage they are aware of but cannot escape. The most profound psychological burden might be the slow realization that comes to many long-serving Marines, that they have been shaped into weapons so effective that they can barely remember being anything else. The conditioning, the enhancement, the constant deployment, all of it works to perfect them as instruments of war while stripping away characteristics that might interfere with that function. Veterans sometimes describe looking back at their pre-Astartes lives and finding themselves unable to connect with the person they were, feeling more like they have read about that person than lived as them. Some Marines embrace this transformation completely, seeing it as ascension beyond the limitations of humanity. They are proud to be weapons, believe their loss of humanity is worthwhile sacrifice for the capability to serve the Emperor more effectively. Others mourn what was lost, even as they acknowledge they would not choose differently, carrying quiet grief for the person they were before conditioning and enhancement reshaped them into what they have become. The Imperium needs its Space Marines to be psychologically resilient, able to fight century after century without breaking, and the combination of genetic enhancement and conditioning generally achieves this goal. But resilience is not the same as invulnerability, and the weight accumulates regardless of how well designed the systems for managing it are. Every Marine carries their burden differently, some appearing unaffected while others visibly struggle, but all of them carry something. The psychological cost of being a weapon that thinks, of living a life defined entirely by war, of witnessing and inflicting violence that would shatter normal minds, is price paid for the service Space Marines provide. Firstborn relations, brothers or strangers. When the Primaris Marines were first introduced to existing Space Marine chapters, the moment carried weight that went far beyond simple reinforcement of military forces. It represented a fundamental challenge to chapter culture, to the brotherhood that defined how Space Marines understood themselves and their relationships with each other. These new warriors were physically superior, equipped with advanced war gear, blessed with genetic stability that previous generations lacked. But they were also strangers, created outside the chapter's normal processes, bearing its gene seed but not its history, claiming brotherhood they had not earned through shared experience. The initial reactions varied between chapters, reflecting their different cultures and traditions. The Ultramarines and their successors, following Guilliman's direct command and example, welcomed the Primaris with relatively little resistance. When your Primarch personally oversees their deployment and undergoes the Rubicon Primaris himself, opposition becomes difficult to justify. The Imperial Fists and their successors, pragmatic warriors focused on capability rather than tradition, evaluated the Primaris on tactical merit and generally found them acceptable after initial combat trials proved their effectiveness. But other chapters responded with suspicion or outright hostility. The Space Wolves, fiercely protective of their traditions and cultural identity, initially resisted accepting Primaris Marines who had not been born on Fenris, who had not undergone the trials that turned men into sons of Russ. The Dark Angels and their successors, carrying secrets so dark that they would risk civil war to protect them, viewed the Primaris with deep mistrust. These were warriors created and conditioned by the Mechanicus, potentially compromised by exposure to information that the Unforgiven went to extreme lengths to conceal. The Black Templars, whose chapter structure and practices diverged significantly from Codex standards, saw the Primaris as potential threat to their unique identity. The arguments against accepting Primaris Marines often centered on tradition and trust. Space Marine chapters maintain their own recruitment and training processes, carefully developed over millennia to ensure that warriors embody chapter culture and values. These processes serve as gatekeeping mechanisms, testing not just physical capability but loyalty, compatibility with chapter doctrine, willingness to embrace its traditions. The Primaris Marines bypassed these mechanisms entirely. Created by external forces and presented as ready-made warriors who supposedly shared the chapter's gene seed, but had never proven themselves through the trials that made someone truly a member. Firstborn Marines who had earned their place through these traditional trials sometimes felt that Primaris warriors were being handed honors they had not earned. The fact that Primaris were physically superior only made this worse in some cases, seeming to suggest that their enhancement was replacement for the trials and experience that Firstborn had acquired through years of service. Why undergo dangerous trials? Why spend decades as scout learning your craft? Why earn your place in a tactical squad through demonstrated competence if the Mechanicus could just manufacture superior warriors in laboratories? The cultural dimension created additional friction. Each chapter maintains its own traditions, rituals, internal culture that binds warriors together and provides identity beyond simply being Space Marines. These cultural elements are passed down through generations of Marines, learned through immersion and teaching from veterans who embody the chapter's spirit. Primaris Marines, especially those awakened from Call's stasis chambers, lacked this cultural education. They might carry the gene seed of a chapter, but they did not know its heroes, its songs, its specific practices that made it unique. For chapters with complex initiation rituals or secret knowledge passed down through generations, integrating Primaris Marines meant deciding what to share with these newcomers. The Dark Angels and their unforgiven successors maintain layers of secrets, revealed only to Marines who progress through ranks and prove themselves absolutely trustworthy. What do you do with Primaris Marines who are full battle brothers by gene seed and capability, but have not undergone the vetting that normally precedes revelation of chapter secrets? Some chapters solved this by treating Primaris as standard Marines who must earn trust through service. Others created separate formations where Primaris fought together but remained isolated from chapter secrets until they proved worthy. The physical differences contributed to the sense of separation. Primaris Marines are noticeably taller, broader, more massive than Firstborn. In armor, this difference is less apparent. But unarmored, it creates visual distinction that makes integration more difficult. Some Firstborn Marines reportedly felt intimidated or resentful of the physical superiority, seeing themselves as rendered obsolete by bigger, stronger replacements. This was particularly acute for veterans who had served for centuries, who suddenly found themselves smaller and weaker than rookies fresh from creation. But combat has a way of resolving such tensions. When bolts are flying and enemies pressing close, what matters is whether the warrior next to you can be relied upon, whether they will stand their ground, whether they fight with skill and courage. Primaris Marines who proved themselves in battle found acceptance from Firstborn, who might have initially resented them. Veterans who shared hard-won tactical wisdom and helped Primaris survive earned respect in return. The shared experience of combat, of fighting and bleeding, and dying together, created bonds that transcended concerns about creation methods or physical differences. The Primaris Marines' initial lack of experience actually helped in some cases. Firstborn veterans recognized that for all their physical advantages, Primaris needed guidance to survive and thrive. This created teaching relationships where experienced Firstborn mentored newer Primaries, sharing knowledge accumulated over decades or centuries of service. These mentorship relationships often developed into genuine bonds as Primaris learned from Firstborn, and Firstborn came to respect Primaris, who listened and applied lessons. The Rubicon. Primaris changed dynamics further. When firstborn Marines began crossing the Rubicon and becoming Primaris themselves, it blurred the line between the two groups. These ascended brought their experience and cultural knowledge with them, becoming living bridges between firstborn and born Primaris populations. A veteran who crosses the Rubicon carries decades of service and deep understanding of chapter culture into their new enhanced form, combining the best of both worlds. These ascended often become leaders who can speak to concerns of both firstborn and Primaris, who understand both perspectives and can mediate between them. As years passed and more chapters recruited and trained their own Primaris Marines, using calls methods, but within their own recruitment and training structures, the distinction between Primaris and firstborn began to matter less. These chapter-raised Primaris underwent the same trials, learned the same culture, were integrated into squads alongside firstborn from the beginning. They were not outsiders being inserted into existing structure, but warriors who belonged from inception. The question shifted from, are Primaris real members of the chapter, to, how do we effectively utilize warriors with different capabilities in coordinated operations? Some tensions persist even in current era. Chapters with strong traditions sometimes struggle when Primaris Marines propose changes to accommodate their different capabilities. A tactic that worked perfectly for centuries might need modification when squads include both firstborn and Primaris, when physical capabilities differ significantly, when equipment requirements vary. Conservative chapters resist such changes, viewing them as corruption of tried methods. More adaptable chapters embrace the opportunity to develop new tactics that leverage both firstborn experience and Primaris capabilities. The relationship between Primaris and firstborn varies greatly between individual Marines. Some firstborn embrace Primaris as brothers, without reservation, seeing them as vital reinforcement for desperate wars. Others maintain distance, accepting Primaris as effective allies, but not truly equal members of the Brotherhood. Some Primaris feel fully integrated, their service and bonds with battle brothers making questions of origin irrelevant. Others remain aware of being somewhat apart, accepted, but not quite belonging in the same way as those who came through traditional paths. Personal relationships span the spectrum from deep brotherhood to professional respect to active hostility. There are cases of firstborn and Primaris forming bonds as strong as any in the Adeptus Astartes, of veterans and newer warriors becoming closer than bloodkin through shared combat and mutual respect. There are also cases of firstborn who refuse to serve alongside Primaris, of chapters where internal divisions along Primaris, firstborn lines create operational problems, of resentments that fester beneath required professional cooperation. The debates within chapters about how to handle Primaris integration continue. Should all new recruits be raised as Primaris, making firstborn a gradually diminishing population? Should chapters maintain both populations indefinitely, accepting that they will field mixed forces? Should all capable firstborn be encouraged or required to cross the Rubicon, creating entirely Primaris chapters? Different chapters answer these questions differently, their responses reflecting their values and strategic calculations. What has become clear through years of deployment and integration is that Primaris Marines are not replacements for firstborn, but additions to the Adeptus Astartes capabilities. They bring physical superiority and genetic stability, but initially lack experience and cultural depth. Firstborn bring centuries of tradition and hard-won wisdom, but lack the enhanced capabilities that Primaris possess. The most effective chapters have learned to leverage both, utilizing Primaris' physical advantages while drawing on firstborn experience, creating combined arms approaches that make the whole greater than sum of parts. The brotherhood that defines Space Marines ultimately transcends questions of how one was created or enhanced. It is forged in combat, in shared hardship, in mutual trust, developed through trials that test warriors to their breaking points and beyond. Primaris Marines who prove themselves earn acceptance not through physical superiority, but through demonstrated courage, skill, and loyalty. Firstborn Marines who share their knowledge and fight alongside newer warriors earn respect not through seniority, but through wisdom and effectiveness. The bonds that matter are not genetic, but experiential, built one battle at a time. The relationship between Primaris and Firstborn remains complex and evolving. Old tensions surface occasionally. New challenges emerge as more Firstborn cross the Rubicon or chapters transition to all Primaris recruitment. But the fundamental reality is that both Primaris and Firstborn are Space Marines, warriors who have sacrificed their humanity to serve the Emperor and protect mankind. In the end, this shared purpose, this common duty, matters more than differences in creation or capability. They are brothers in service, if not always in affection, united by bonds stronger than whatever separates them. Role in Chapter and Imperium. To be a Primaris Marine is to exist within nested layers of hierarchy and expectation, to serve as both individual warrior and symbol of something larger. Every Marine occupies specific place in their chapter's structure, fills particular role in the Imperium's grand strategy, carries weight of being humanity's defenders in a galaxy that threatens extinction from countless directions. Understanding what it means to be Primaris requires understanding these layers, how each one shapes daily existence and long-term purpose. At the most immediate level, a Primaris Marine is member of a squad, usually consisting of 5 to 10 warriors who train together, fight together, live together in the intimate bonds that define Space Marine Brotherhood. The squad is basic tactical unit, the level at which most combat operations function. Squad members develop deep familiarity with each other's capabilities and tendencies, can coordinate in combat without conscious communication, trust each other with their lives because repeated deployments have proven that trust justified. A Marine's squad mates become closer than family. Relationships forged in violence and maintained through shared experience that baseline humans can barely comprehend. Squads belong to companies, larger formations of approximately 100 Marines organized around specific tactical roles. The company structure varies somewhat between chapters, but generally follows patterns established in the Codex Astartes. For Primaris Marines, the 10th Company serves as initial assignment, where newly created warriors learn vanguard tactics through scout operations. From there, they progress through reserve companies, where they develop specialized skills before joining battle companies that contain mix of veteran Marines and specialists capable of handling varied tactical situations. The progression through companies represents a Marine's career arc, moving from inexperienced but capable warrior to veteran with decades or centuries of service. Primaris Marines experience this progression somewhat differently than Firstborn did. Instead of starting as scouts in lighter armor before earning their power armor, Primaris begin as full Marines with complete enhancement and equipment. Their scout phase is tactical specialization rather than initiation period, learning covert operations and reconnaissance that they might not use again until much later in their service. Companies are commanded by captains, legendary warriors, who have proven themselves through centuries of service, who embody their chapter's values and tactical expertise. For a Primaris Marine, your captain is direct commander, the warrior whose orders you follow, whose leadership determines your fate in combat. Captains carry tremendous responsibility, making tactical decisions that mean life or death for their brothers, balancing mission objectives against casualties, choosing when to advance and when to withdraw. The relationship between captain and company becomes crucial to morale and effectiveness. Great captains inspire absolute loyalty, their companies fighting with cohesion and determination that makes them more than sum of individual capabilities. Above captains stand chapter masters, warriors who command entire chapters and embody everything their organization represents. Chapter masters are legends, Marines who have not only survived centuries of combat, but excelled to the point of being chosen to lead 1,000 brothers. For most Primaris Marines, the chapter master is distant figure, seen at ceremonial occasions or during major campaigns, but not directly interacted with regularly. Yet the chapter master's influence permeates everything, their tactical philosophy and leadership style shaping how the entire chapter functions. For Primaris Marines, there is additional complexity around their role in chapter hierarchy. Those integrated into existing chapters must find their place in structures that existed for millennia before their arrival. They might outrank Firstborn in physical capability, but not in experience or tactical knowledge. A Primaris veteran sergeant might command a squad that includes Firstborn, who have served longer and know more, creating leadership challenges that require both confidence and humility. The Primaris must assert authority while remaining open to wisdom from those with more experience, balancing their position with practical reality of their relative newness. Chapters formed entirely from Primaris during the Ultima founding face different challenges. They possess all the physical capability and equipment, but lack the historical weight that gives established chapters their identity and cultural cohesion. A chapter that is only decades old lacks the heroes and traditions that chapters with millennia of service can draw upon. These new chapters must forge their own identities, establishing traditions and tactical doctrines, building the cultural framework that transforms a collection of warriors into a true chapter with distinct character. Beyond chapter structure, Primaris Marines occupy specific role in broader Imperium strategy. They are not simply reinforcements, but represent institutional commitment to the Adeptus Astartes' future. The resources invested in their creation, the technological developments required for their war gear, the political capital Guilliman spent ensuring their acceptance, all indicate that Primaris Marines are intended to be primary Space Marine type going forward. This creates pressure to perform, to justify the investment, to prove that the Primaris project was worthwhile investment rather than failed experiment. The propaganda surrounding Primaris Marines adds another layer. They are portrayed across the Imperium as new breed of angels of death, superior warriors who represent humanity's hope against darkness. Images of Primaris Marines appear on recruiting posters, in Imperial propaganda, in stories told across millions of worlds. This symbolic role means that Primaris performance affects morale across the entire Imperium. When Primaris Marines win notable victories, it provides psychological boost to Imperial forces and civilian populations desperate for hope. When they fail or suffer significant casualties, it undermines faith in one of the Imperium's most visible new weapons. This symbolic weight creates psychological burden for individual Primaris Marines. They are not just warriors fighting battles, but representatives of an idea, symbols of the Imperium's ability to adapt and overcome. Every action taken, every decision made, potentially contributes to or detracts from the legend of what Primaris Marines represent. Some Marines embrace this symbolic role, understanding themselves as living propaganda whose example inspires others to service. Others resent it, feeling that the symbolic expectations interfere with practical necessities of warfare. The relationship between Primaris Marines and other Imperial institutions varies in complexity. The Adeptus Mechanicus claims partial ownership of Primaris success, given that Call developed them and Mechanicus facilities produce their advanced war gear. This creates tension when chapters assert their independence from Mechanicus influence, when they resist attempts by tech priests to study or modify Primaris Marines, when they insist on maintaining Astartes' autonomy despite technological dependence on Mars. Relations with the Inquisition remain complicated. The Inquisition views everything through lens of potential corruption or heresy, and the Primaris Marines represent something new and thus suspect. Some inquisitors have questioned whether Call's modifications might have created vulnerabilities to chaos corruption, whether the genetic changes might have unexpected consequences, whether the entire program might be an elaborate plot by entities seeking to undermine the Imperium from within. Most inquisitorial concerns have proven unfounded, but the suspicion persists, creating situations where Primaris Marines must prove their purity repeatedly. The Adepta Sororitas and other faith-based imperial institutions sometimes struggle with what Primaris Marines represent. The creation of improved Space Marines suggests that the Emperor's work was imperfect, that human ingenuity could enhance what he created. This runs counter to theology that views the Emperor as perfect and his creations as unimprovable. The fact that Guilliman authorized the project helps, as most imperial institutions accept Primarch authority, but theological debates about whether Primaris Marines are blessed advancement or blasphemous modification continue in some circles. For individual Primaris Marines, these institutional relationships mostly remain abstract concerns. They focus on immediate duties: serving their squad, obeying their captain, fighting the Emperor's enemies. The politics and symbolism occur at levels above their direct experience, filtered through chapter command structure and manifesting mainly as general expectations that they perform well and uphold the reputation of both their chapter and the Primaris Marines as whole. The role that weighs most heavily on most Primaris Marines is simply being a Space Marine, being humanity's shield against darkness that threatens from every direction. They are deployed to worst conflicts, sent where fighting is thickest and enemies most dangerous, expected to prevail through combination of enhancement, training, and faith. This role means accepting that you exist to fight and die for people who will never know your name, to protect an Imperium that would discard you without thought if you faltered, to serve an Emperor who is at best a corpse on a throne and at worst a myth maintained to control populations. Yet most Primaris Marines embrace this role, find meaning and purpose in service even when they understand its costs. They were created for this purpose, conditioned to accept it, enhanced to fulfill it effectively. The alternatives: living in galaxy where Imperium falls, where chaos devours humanity, where Xenos exterminate mankind, justify any sacrifice required to prevent them. Primaris Marines serve because they must, because something must stand against the darkness, because if not them, then who? The role in Chapter and Imperium ultimately defines a Primaris Marine's existence more than individual personality or preferences. You are warrior first, individual second, if at all. Your purpose is to fight. Your value is measured in combat effectiveness. Your legacy will be the enemies you killed and the battles you won. This singular focus provides clarity and direction, but also constrains what your life can be. You are tools serving specific purpose, and everything else about your existence flows from that fundamental reality. The unspoken truths. Beneath the propaganda and the conditioning, beneath the armor and the genetic enhancement, exist truths about being a Primaris Marine that are rarely acknowledged openly. These are not secrets exactly, not information that is deliberately hidden, but rather realities that are uncomfortable enough that they remain mostly unspoken. They are the things that veterans know, but do not discuss with outsiders, that battle brothers might acknowledge to each other in rare moments of vulnerability, but never include in official reports or public statements. The first unspoken truth is that enhancement does not eliminate humanity, so much as compress and warp it into forms that barely resemble baseline human experience. Space Marines are taught that they have transcended ordinary human limitations, that their modifications make them superior beings. But the reality is more complex. The emotions, the doubts, the fears that humans experience do not disappear when you become an Astartes. They become attenuated, processed through neurological structures that have been fundamentally altered, expressed in ways that differ from normal human behavior, but they remain. A Space Marine can feel fear even though conditioning prevents that fear from affecting combat performance, can feel grief at a battle brother's death even though training teaches immediate tactical adjustment rather than mourning. can experience something like love or friendship, even though such bonds are expressed through shared combat and duty rather than the ways baseline humans relate to each other. The emotions exist, filtered through enhanced neurology and tactical focus. Present, but transformed into forms that would be difficult for outsiders to recognize as human feeling. Veterans sometimes speak quietly of missing things they never experienced or can barely remember experiencing. Peaceful mornings, comfortable beds, food eaten for pleasure rather than fuel, conversations that are not briefings or tactical discussions, connections with beings who are not weapons like themselves. These are not crippling losses, not absences that prevent function, but they are absences nonetheless. Something was sacrificed to create Space Marines, and while that sacrifice was necessary and worthwhile from military perspective, from human perspective, it represents truncation of what life could have been. The second unspoken truth is that not all Space Marines believe, not really. Not in the depths of their consciousness where true belief would reside. The conditioning teaches loyalty to Emperor and Imperium, instills faith as psychological armor against chaos corruption. But beneath the conditioning, some Marines harbor doubts they dare not voice. They see the endless suffering, the brutal calculus that sacrifices billions for military objectives, the corruption and incompetence that pervade imperial institutions, and they question whether the system they serve deserves their absolute devotion. These doubts rarely manifest as disloyalty or hesitation in combat. The conditioning is too deep, the habit of service too ingrained. A Marine can fight effectively, can kill Emperor's enemies without hesitation, while simultaneously harboring quiet questions about whether the Imperium truly represents humanity's best hope, or simply the least terrible option in a galaxy of nightmares. The fact that such doubts are never spoken about publicly, that admitting them would risk censure or worse, means they remain internal struggles that each Marine wrestles with alone. The third unspoken truth is that the physical modifications that make Space Marines so effective also create forms of suffering that baseline humans cannot comprehend. The enhanced senses that serve as reconnaissance tools also mean constant sensory overload. The ability to function without sleep means never experiencing true rest. The accelerated healing means injuries knit imperfectly, creating chronic pain that is suppressed but never entirely absent. The perfect memory means carrying every trauma in pristine detail, unable to benefit from the mercy of forgetting that helps baseline humans process horrible experiences. The Belisarian furnace, that emergency system that can pull Primaris Marines back from death's edge, creates its own particular horror. Marines who have experienced furnace activation describe it as the worst thing they have endured, worse than any wound, worse than any combat trauma. The sensation of dying and being forcibly reanimated, of systems failing and then restarting under chemical duress, creates psychological scars that the conditioning struggles to process. Yet this organ exists in every Primaris Marine's chest, a constant reminder that death itself might not be final, that your body might revive you against your will to experience more suffering. The fourth unspoken truth is that Space Marines are aware, at least at some level, that they are tools being used by forces that care nothing for them as individuals. The Imperium loves Space Marines in the abstract, celebrates them as heroes, creates myths around their exploits. But individual Marines are expendable, their lives valued only in terms of tactical utility. Chapters understand this, see how High Command deploys them, how little consideration is given to their casualties when weighed against strategic objectives. The mythology suggests that Space Marines willingly sacrifice themselves. The reality is more complex. They sacrifice because they have been created and conditioned to do so, because refusing would betray everything their existence has been devoted to creating. This creates a particular bitterness in some long-serving veterans who have seen generations of battle brothers die, while the Imperium they defend remains fundamentally unchanged in its brutality and dysfunction. They continue serving because what else can they do? Because abandoning duty would make all the sacrifice meaningless. But they harbor no illusions about whether their service actually makes the Imperium better or simply maintains terrible status quo. The fifth unspoken truth is that crossing the Rubicon Primaris, or being created as Primaris, does not actually make you better than Firstborn in all the ways that matter. Yes, physically superior. Yes, more resistant to damage and corruption. But the experience, the wisdom, the tactical intuition that comes from centuries of service, these cannot be imparted through any amount of enhancement. Some Primaris Marines are aware that despite their physical advantages, they are inferior warriors to Firstborn veterans in important ways. This creates internal conflict between the propaganda that portrays Primaris as superior and the practical reality that capability comes from more than genetic modification. The sixth unspoken truth is that many Space Marines, if they were being completely honest, find aspects of their existence lonely in ways that the emphasis on brotherhood and chapter bonds cannot fully address. The separation from baseline humanity is profound and irreversible. Space Marines cannot relate to normal humans except in the most superficial ways, but they also struggle to fully connect with each other because the conditioning that made them effective warriors also made them less capable of the vulnerability and emotional openness that deep personal connection requires. Battle brothers share bonds forged in combat, trust each other absolutely, would die for each other without hesitation. But these relationships exist within strict frameworks of duty and tactical necessity. The ability to simply be with another consciousness, to share thoughts and feelings without purpose or goal, to connect in ways that are not oriented around combat effectiveness, this is largely lost to them. Some Marines feel this absence acutely, others barely notice it, but it exists as feature of their transformed existence. The seventh unspoken truth is that some Space Marines regret what they have become, would choose differently if that choice were still available. Not many. The conditioning generally prevents such fundamental rejection of transformation, but some, particularly those who retain clearer memories of their pre-Astartes existence, who underwent transformation knowing more fully what they were giving up, carry quiet grief for the life they did not live. They understand that their service is necessary, that the galaxy needs Space Marines, that their sacrifice protects countless humans who deserve protection. But understanding necessity does not eliminate the sense of loss. These Marines never speak of this regret, because doing so would be seen as weakness, would undermine the mythology that portrays becoming a Space Marine as highest honor rather than terrible sacrifice. They continue serving effectively because the conditioning and sense of duty override personal feeling, but in rare moments of privacy, they might acknowledge to themselves what was lost, might wonder what life could have been if different paths had been available. The final unspoken truth is that despite everything, the enhancement, the conditioning, the endless combat, the transformation into weapons that think, Space Marines remain, at their core, beings capable of nobility and sacrifice that transcends programming. They make choices that programming cannot fully explain, demonstrate courage that goes beyond conditioned fearlessness, form connections that exist despite the barriers created by their modification. They are weapons, yes, but weapons that somehow retain capacity for self-determination, for choosing to serve principles beyond simple duty. This truth is perhaps most dangerous because it complicates the clean narrative that Space Marines are simply tools. If they are capable of genuine choice, then their service becomes actual sacrifice rather than programmed response. If they retain humanity despite enhancements stripping away so much of what makes baseline humans human, then their existence represents something more complex than the Imperium's propaganda suggests. They are neither the perfect angels of death that mythology portrays, nor the mindless weapons that cynics claim. They are something in between, something that defies easy categorization. These unspoken truths exist in the spaces between official doctrine and personal experience. In the gulf between what Space Marines are supposed to be and what they actually are. They are known but not discussed, acknowledged but not examined too closely, because to do so would require confronting uncomfortable realities about what the creation of Space Marines actually entails. Better to maintain the mythology, to focus on duty and service, to accept the conditioning's framework rather than questioning it too deeply. The truths remain unspoken not because they are entirely unknown, but because speaking them serves no purpose that outweighs the comfort of leaving them buried. Conclusion. The reality beyond the legend. When you see images of Primaris Marines in Imperial propaganda, when you hear the stories told across 1,000,000 worlds about the angels of death who defend humanity, when you witness them striding through battlefields in their magnificent armor, it is easy to believe the mythology. Easy to think that becoming a Primaris Marine represents transcendence, evolution beyond human limitations into something purely superior. The reality is far more complex, far more painful, far more human than the legends suggest. To be a Primaris Marine is to exist in a state of profound contradiction. You are more than human in every measurable way, stronger, faster, more resilient, capable of feats that baseline humans cannot comprehend. Yet you are also less than human in important ways that are harder to quantify but no less real. The conditioning that makes you an effective warrior also strips away aspects of human experience that give life texture and meaning. The enhancement that grants you superhuman capability also separates you irrevocably from the humanity you were born into and are meant to defend. You live in a body that has been optimized for killing, but that suffers in ways normal bodies do not. Every organ implanted brought pain. Every modification altered who you are at fundamental level. The strength you possess requires constant conscious control, lest you destroy what you mean to protect. The senses that serve you in combat mean you can never experience the simple peace of sensory quiet that normal humans take for granted. The enhanced physiology that keeps you alive through wounds that would kill others also means experiencing pain in ways that are simultaneously more and less acute than baseline human suffering. Your mind has been shaped by hypno-indoctrination that implanted knowledge and tactical capability at the cost of clarity about who you were before transformation. You carry perfect memory of every battle, every death witnessed, every horror encountered, with no capacity to forget, and thus no relief from the weight of accumulated trauma. The conditioning provides framework for processing this trauma functionally, but does not eliminate its existence. You are resilient, but not invulnerable, capable of continuing but not unaffected. Your relationships exist within strict frameworks of duty and brotherhood. You trust your battle brothers absolutely, would die for them without hesitation, yet struggle to connect with them in ways that go beyond tactical necessity. The gulf between you and baseline humanity is vast enough that meaningful connection becomes nearly impossible. You are surrounded by others, yet fundamentally isolated by the uniqueness of your transformation and experience. Your purpose is singular and inescapable. You exist to fight, to kill the Emperor's enemies, to serve the Imperium until combat finally claims your life, or you are interred in a dreadnought's sarcophagus to extend your service beyond the normal boundaries of mortality. Everything about your existence, from the moment you were selected as aspirant through every moment since, has been oriented toward making you an effective weapon. This clarity of purpose provides meaning and direction, but also constrains what your life can be. You are a weapon that thinks, and the thinking serves primarily to make you better at being a weapon. Yet, within these constraints, within the limitations imposed by enhancement and conditioning, you remain capable of things that pure weapon could not achieve. You make choices that reflect values beyond simple programming. You form connections that transcend tactical utility. You demonstrate courage and nobility that go beyond conditioned fearlessness. You are aware of contradictions in your existence, and you wrestle with them, even though the conditioning discourages such examination. You are simultaneously less than human and somehow more than what simple weapon could be. The experience of being Primaris Marine specifically adds layers to this complex reality. If you were awakened from stasis after 10 millennia, you carry the burden of temporal displacement, of being torn from your time and thrust into a future you cannot fully understand. If you were recruited and raised as Primaris in current era, you face pressure to prove yourself worthy of enhancement, to justify resources invested in your creation. If you cross the Rubicon Primaris from firstborn status, you carry memories of what you were before and awareness of how transformation changed you in ways both beneficial and costly. Your relationships with firstborn brothers remain complex, shaped by physical differences and experiential gaps. You might be physically superior, but less experienced, might carry genetic advantages, but lack cultural depth that comes from longer service. You exist in space between outsider and full member, accepted but sometimes still somewhat apart. Your belonging questioned until combat proves it beyond doubt. The propaganda portrays Primaris Marines as unambiguous improvement, next step in Space Marine evolution, warriors who represent hope for Imperium's survival. The reality is messier. You are improvement in some ways, physically more capable, more resistant to genetic corruption, equipped with superior war gear, but you are also continuation of the same fundamental bargain that has always defined Space Marines, trading away humanity for capability to serve, sacrificing individual existence for purpose larger than self. The question of whether this bargain is worthwhile has no simple answer. From military perspective, obviously yes. The Imperium needs warriors like you, cannot survive without the capability you represent. From moral perspective, it depends on what value you place on individual human experience versus collective human survival. From your own perspective as Primaris Marine, the question becomes almost meaningless because you exist on the other side of the bargain already, shaped by it so completely that imagining alternatives feels almost impossible. What can be said with certainty is that being a Primaris Marine means living a reality that is simultaneously glorious and tragic, empowering and limiting, meaningful and painful. You are weapon that thinks about being weapon, consciousness that has been shaped but not entirely destroyed, human who has been transformed into something that transcends and diminishes humanity simultaneously. You serve purposes larger than yourself while carrying weight that is uniquely personal. You protect people who will never know your name while struggling with isolation that comes from being so different from those you defend. The galaxy needs you. Humanity needs you. Without Primaris Marines and their firstborn brothers, the Imperium would fall, and everything humans have built across 10,000 years would be consumed by darkness that presses in from every direction. Your existence, with all its costs and contradictions, makes possible the survival of billions who will never understand what you are or what you have sacrificed to protect them. This is the reality of being a Primaris Marine in Warhammer 40,000. It is not the clean narrative of propaganda or the simple condemnation of cynics. It is complex human experience compressed through inhuman transformation, nobility expressed through violence, sacrifice that is simultaneously willing and coerced by conditioning. It is existence that defies easy judgment while demanding to be understood in all its painful, powerful, tragic complexity. You are Primaris Marine. You are weapon and warrior, tool and thinker, enhanced and diminished, serving and suffering, transcendent and tragically human. You are exactly what the galaxy needs you to be, and far more than anyone outside the experience can fully comprehend. Your reality exists in the space between the legend and the truth, and understanding that reality means understanding both what you have gained and what was lost in the transformation that made you what you are. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the reality of being a Primaris Marine in Warhammer 40K, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to Q on 40K for more ASMR-style lore explorations. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts on the Primaris Marines, or what other aspects of the 40K universe you'd like to see covered in this format. The Emperor protects, and so do we, one video at a time.
I hope you guys enjoyed the story. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, share button, whatever you want. Give me some feedback if there's any. And yeah, sleep well.